Sarah Mitchell couldn't stop staring at the dark red stains on her trembling hands, her breath coming in short, desperate gasps as she stood frozen in the doorway of room 13. The hotel corridor stretched endlessly behind her, its flickering lights casting dancing shadows that seemed to mock her terror. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything except stand there like a statue, but her body refused to obey. Her mind kept replaying the same horrifying moment over and over, the door swinging open, the scene inside, and then everything spinning out of control. "What have I done?" she whispered to the empty hallway, her voice barely audible above the humming of the old building's heating system. "Oh God, what have I done?" 3 hours earlier, Sarah had been sitting in the small cafe across the street from the Grand Pacific Hotel, nervously stirring her coffee and watching the rain streak down the windows. She was a journalist, 28 years old, with dreams bigger than her current position at a local newspaper that mostly covered garden shows and charity bake sales. But tonight was different. Tonight she had received an anonymous email that promised to change everything. Room 13, Grand Pacific Hotel. Come alone at midnight. Bring no one. Tell no one. This is the story that will make your career. The message had been simple, direct, and impossible to ignore. Sarah had spent the last 5 years chasing stories, trying to prove herself in a world that seemed determined to keep her writing about flower arrangements and local politics. This was her chance. This was finally her moment to break free and become the journalist she always knew she could be. She checked her watch again. 11:45. 15 minutes until midnight. The cafe was nearly empty. An elderly man sat in the corner reading a newspaper, occasionally glancing up at the television mounted on the wall, where a weather reporter discussed the approaching storm. The barista, a young woman with purple-streaked hair, wiped down the counter with mechanical movements, clearly eager for her shift to end. Sarah pulled her notebook from her bag and flipped through the pages, reviewing the notes she'd made about the Grand Pacific Hotel. The building had stood in the heart of the city for almost a century, its Art Deco facade a reminder of more glamorous times. Over the years, it had become a fixture of local legend and gossip. People whispered about strange occurrences in room 13, about guests who checked in but never checked out, about sounds in the night that couldn't be explained. Most of it was nonsense, Sarah knew. Old buildings make strange noises. People love ghost stories. But there had been one incident 15 years ago that she couldn't dismiss so easily. A businessman named Robert Chen had been found dead in room 13 under mysterious circumstances. The official report said heart attack, but there were rumors. There were always rumors. Sarah's phone buzzed. Another message from the same anonymous sender. "Don't be late." She paid for her coffee, grabbed her coat, and stepped out into the rain. The cold drops hit her face like tiny needles, and she pulled her collar up against the wind. The Grand Pacific Hotel loomed across the street, its windows glowing with warm yellow light that seemed inviting and sinister at the same time. The lobby was exactly as she remembered it from the research photos she'd found online. High ceilings with ornate molding, a crystal chandelier that had probably hung there since the 1930s, marble floors polished to a mirror shine. Behind the front desk sat a man who looked to be in his 60s, thin and pale, with wire-rimmed glasses perched on his narrow nose. He was reading a book and didn't look up as Sarah entered. "Good evening," Sarah said, approaching the desk. "I'm here to see someone in room 13. The man's head snapped up so quickly that his glasses slipped down his nose. His eyes, magnified behind the thick lenses, widened with something that looked like fear. "Room 13?" he repeated slowly. "Are you certain?" "Yes," Sarah replied, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I have an appointment." The man stared at her for a long moment, his fingers tapping nervously on the desk. Then he shook his head slightly, as if clearing away unwanted thoughts. "Room 13 has been unoccupied for years," he said carefully. "No one has stayed there since the incident." "What incident?" Sarah asked, leaning forward. This was interesting. This was the kind of detail that could make a story come alive. The man's expression closed down immediately, like shutters slamming over windows. "I'm not at liberty to discuss hotel matters with guests. If you're not checking in, I'll have to ask you to leave." Before Sarah could respond, the elevator at the far end of the lobby dinged softly. The doors slid open and a woman stepped out. She was striking, probably in her early 40s, with jet black hair pulled back in a severe bun and wearing an expensive-looking dark suit. Her heels clicked sharply on the marble floor as she walked toward them. "Is there a problem, Henry?" she asked the desk clerk. Her voice smooth, but with an edge that suggested she was used to being obeyed. "This young woman is asking about room 13, Miss Winters," Henry replied, his tone respectful but nervous. Ms. Winters turned her attention to Sarah, her dark eyes scanning her from head to toe in a way that made Sarah feel like a specimen under a microscope. "And you are?" Ms. Winters asked. "Sarah Mitchell. I'm a journalist. I received information that someone wanted to meet me in room 13. "A journalist?" Ms. Winters repeated, and something flickered across her face. Surprise? Concern? It was gone too quickly for Sarah to identify. "And who exactly invited you to our hotel at this hour?" "I don't know," Sarah admitted. The message was anonymous. Ms. Winters and Henry exchanged a glance that Sarah couldn't interpret. Then Ms. Winters smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I'm afraid there's been a misunderstanding. Room 13 is not available. It hasn't been used in many years. Someone must be playing a prank on you." "Please," Sarah said, and she could hear the desperation in her own voice. "I've come all this way. Could I at least see the room? Just for a moment. I'm writing a story about historic hotels, and the Grand Pacific has such an interesting history." It was a lie, but a convincing one. Sarah watched Ms. Winters carefully, trying to read her reaction. The older woman's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Our hotel's history is not a matter of public entertainment, Ms. Mitchell. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. If you don't, I'll call security." Sarah felt frustration rising in her chest. She'd come this far. She couldn't just give up now. "I have a right to be here," she said, her voice firmer than before. "This is a public establishment. I'm not causing any trouble. I just want to see one room." "Henry, call security," Ms. Winters said coldly. But before Henry could pick up the phone, the lights flickered. Once, twice, 3 times. The chandelier above them swayed slightly, and somewhere in the building, something made a sound like a door slamming. Henry's face went white. "It's happening again," he whispered. "Be quiet," Ms. Winters snapped, but Sarah could see that she was rattled too. Whatever was happening, it frightened both of them. The lights stabilized, and for a moment, everything was silent. Then, clear and distinct, they heard it. Footsteps directly above them. Slow, deliberate footsteps, like someone pacing back and forth. "That's the 2nd floor," Henry said, his voice shaking. "That's where—" "I said be quiet." Miss Winter's composure was cracking. She turned to Sarah, and now there was something different in her eyes. Not fear exactly, but something close to it. You need to leave, now. This isn't a game. This hotel, room 13, there are things you don't understand. Then help me understand, Sarah pressed. That's all I want. The truth. The footsteps above them stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the noise. Miss Winters closed her eyes briefly, and when she opened them again, she seemed to have made a decision. If I show you room 13, will you leave immediately afterward? Will you promise not to write anything about what you see? Sarah hesitated. Promising not to write about something went against every journalistic instinct she had, but she also knew this might be her only chance. I promise I'll be fair, she said carefully. I'll be accurate. I won't sensationalize anything. Miss Winter studied her for another long moment, then nodded. Henry, give me the key. But Ms. Winters, the board specifically said, give me the key, Henry. With shaking hands, Henry reached under the desk and produced an old brass key, much different from the modern key cards the hotel surely used for other rooms. He held it out to Ms. Winters as if it might burn him. Follow me, Ms. Winters said to Sarah, and whatever you do, don't touch anything. They walked to the elevator in silence. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. This was it. This was really happening. She was about to see room 13. The elevator was old-fashioned with an ornate brass gate that had to be pulled closed manually. As they ascended, Sarah watched the floors tick by on the analog indicator above the door. First floor, second floor. The elevator shuddered slightly as it came to a stop. The second floor hallway was dimly lit, with faded carpet and wallpaper that might have been elegant decades ago, but now just looked tired and sad. The air felt different here, heavier somehow, and there was a smell Sarah couldn't quite place. Not unpleasant exactly, but strange. Old wood and dust and something else. Something almost sweet. Room 13 was at the end of the hall, set slightly apart from the other rooms. The brass number on the door was tarnished, and there were scratch marks on the wood around the door frame, as if someone had clawed at it. Miss Winters stopped in front of the door, the key held loosely in her hand. Last chance to change your mind, she said quietly. I'm not changing my mind, Sarah replied. Very well. Miss Winters inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a click that sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet hallway. The door swung open. The room was dark, lit only by the dim light spilling in from the hallway. Miss Winters reached inside and flipped a switch. A single lamp flickered to life, casting long shadows across the space. It was an ordinary hotel room, or at least it appeared to be. A bed with a faded floral bedspread, a desk and chair, a dresser with a mirror above it, a door that presumably led to a bathroom. But there was something off about it all, something that made Sarah's skin prickle with unease. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dust, confirming that the room had indeed been unused for years. But more than that, everything was arranged in a way that looked staged, as if someone had deliberately positioned each item to create a specific scene. On the desk sat an old leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. Beside it was a fountain pen, still uncapped. A teacup and saucer sat on the nightstand, and when Sarah looked closer, she could see that the cup still contained what looked like dried tea leaves at the bottom. It's been like this since that night, Ms. Winters said softly. 15 years ago. We've left everything exactly as it was. Why? Sarah asked, pulling out her phone to take photos. No photos, Ms. Winters said sharply. You promised. I promised to be fair and accurate. How can I be accurate without documentation? Ms. Winters hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Fine. But you show those photos to anyone before speaking to me first, and I'll sue you for everything you have. Sarah began taking pictures, her journalistic instincts taking over. She photographed the room from different angles, making sure to capture every detail: the dust, the dated furniture, the eerie stillness of it all. Tell me what happened here, she said, still taking photos. Tell me about Robert Chen. Ms. Winters walked slowly into the room, her arms crossed over her chest as if protecting herself from something. Robert Chen was a businessman from Seattle. He checked in on a Thursday evening, said he was in town for meetings. He seemed perfectly normal, perfectly healthy. The next morning, the maid found him dead in this room. Heart attack, the coroner said. 42 years old, no history of heart problems, and suddenly just dead. But you don't believe it was a heart attack, Sarah said. It wasn't a question. I don't know what I believe anymore, Ms. Winters admitted. But there were things about that night that never made sense. Robert Chen called the front desk at 11:45. He said someone was in his room. He said someone was watching him. Security came up immediately, but when they got here, the door was locked from the inside. They had to break it down. Robert was alone in the room, already dead. And this? She gestured at the desk. This journal wasn't here when he checked in. He had no luggage except a small briefcase. Where did this come from? Sarah moved closer to the desk, her camera forgotten for the moment. The journal drew her like a magnet. She could see writing on the open pages, neat handwriting in black ink. What does it say? She asked. We don't know. We've never opened it. The police took photos of it, of everything, but they couldn't find anything useful. They left it here, and we just left everything as it was. The hotel's board of directors decided to keep this room closed. Too many questions, too much potential liability. Can I look at it? Sarah reached toward the journal. I wouldn't, Ms. Winters said quickly. Please don't touch anything. That's what I meant when I said you don't understand. This room. Something is wrong with this room. Staff members won't come up here. Guests in nearby rooms have complained about sounds, about feelings of being watched. 3 years ago, we tried to renovate this floor, and every worker we hired quit within days. They said they felt sick being near this door. One man had a breakdown and had to be hospitalized. Sarah pulled her hand back, but her mind was racing. This was bigger than she'd imagined. This wasn't just a cold case or a local legend. There was real fear here, real mystery. The message I received, she said slowly. It told me to come here at midnight. It said this would make my career. Who would send that? Who would want me here? Miss Winters shook her head. I have no idea. As far as I know, only 3 people have keys to this room. Myself, Henry, and the owner of the hotel. Who owns the hotel? A man named Marcus Blackwood. But he hasn't been seen in years. He bought the Grand Pacific 5 years ago through a shell company, and as far as anyone knows, he's never actually set foot in the building. Sarah's reporter instincts were screaming now. Anonymous owner. Mysterious death. A room that seemed to frighten everyone. This was more than just a story. This was something big. She checked her watch. 11:58. 2 minutes until midnight. We should go, Ms. Winters said, moving toward the door. "I've shown you what you wanted to see. Now you need to—" She stopped mid-sentence. They both heard it at the same time. Footsteps in the hallway, getting closer. "Did Henry follow us up?" Sarah asked. Ms. Winters' face had gone pale. "Henry never leaves the front desk. Never." The footsteps were slow and measured, just like the sounds they'd heard earlier in the lobby. They were coming from the direction of the elevator, moving steadily toward room 13. Sarah felt her mouth go dry. "Who is that?" "I don't know," Ms. Winters whispered, "but we need to leave, now." But before either of them could move, a figure appeared in the doorway. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a long, dark coat that was wet from the rain. His face was shadowed, but there was something familiar about the way he stood, the angle of his shoulders. "Good evening, ladies," he said, and his voice was smooth and cultured with just a hint of amusement. "I see you've started without me." He stepped into the light, and Sarah gasped. She knew this face. She'd seen it in the research she'd done in the old newspaper articles about Robert Chen's death. It was impossible, absolutely impossible, but there was no denying it. The man standing in the doorway looked exactly like Robert Chen. Ms. Winters made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. No, this can't be. You're dead. You've been dead for 15 years. The man smiled, and there was something cold about that smile, something that made Sarah's blood freeze in her veins. "Death," he said softly, "is not always as permanent as people think, especially not in room 13. Sarah's mind was reeling. This had to be a trick, some kind of elaborate hoax. People didn't come back from the dead. That was impossible. But the man looked so much like the photos she'd seen, down to the smallest details. "Who are you?" she demanded, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do you want?" "Who am I?" The man laughed, a sound with no humor in it. "That's a more complicated question than you might think, Miss Mitchell. But you can call me Robert, since that's the name I wore last time I was here. And what I want? Well, I want you to understand the truth about this room. I want you to write the story. That's why I invited you here." "You sent me the email?" Sarah pulled out her phone, holding it up as if it could protect her. "How did you even know about me?" "I know a great deal about many things," Robert said, moving further into the room. Ms. Winters backed away from him, her eyes wide with terror. "I've been watching this hotel for a very long time. I've been watching this room especially. And when I realized that someone was finally ready to learn the truth, someone brave enough and curious enough to dig deeper than surface appearances, I knew it had to be you." "The truth about what?" Sarah asked. "About your death? About what happened here 15 years ago? 15 years, 50 years, 100 years. Time works differently here." Robert walked to the desk and placed his hand on the journal. "This room is special, Ms. Mitchell. It's a thin place, a spot where the barriers between worlds wear thin. People have known about places like this for centuries, though most have forgotten or stopped believing. But room 13? This has always been a doorway. A doorway to where?" Sarah's hand was shaking as she raised her phone to record. Whatever was happening, she needed to document it. This was insane, impossible, but it was happening. "To the other side," Robert said simply, "to the place where those who die with unfinished business go, to the realm of the lost and the seeking." Miss Winters had backed all the way to the wall. "This is madness. You're not Robert Chen. You're an imposter, someone playing a cruel joke. Am I? Robert turned to face her fully, and as he did, something changed. It was subtle at first, just a flicker around his edges, as if he were a projected image that momentarily lost focus. Then for just a second, Sarah saw something else in his place, a shadow, tall and dark, and definitely not human. Then it was gone, and he was just a man again. Tell me, Diana Winters, if I'm just an imposter, how do I know about the birthmark on your left shoulder, shaped like a crescent moon? How do I know that you were the last person Robert Chen spoke to before he died? How do I know what he said to you? Ms. Winters' face crumbled. Stop it, please stop. He told you he loved you, Robert continued relentlessly. He said he was going to leave his wife, that you two would finally be together. You'd been having an affair for 6 months. That's why he was really here, wasn't it? Not for business meetings. He came to see you, and when he died, you buried that truth because you were afraid of what people would say, afraid of what it would do to your career. Miss Winters slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, her head in her hands. How could you know that? No one knows that. I never told anyone. The dead know many things, Robert said, and there was something almost sad in his voice now. They see the secrets we hide, the lies we tell ourselves. That's why room 13 is so dangerous. It shows people the truth they don't want to face. Sarah's mind was struggling to process what she was hearing and seeing. This couldn't be real. It violated every law of nature, every principle of rational thought. But she'd learned as a journalist that the strangest stories were often the true ones. Why did you die? She asked. The real Robert Chen. Why did he die in this room? Because he was afraid, Robert said, turning back to face her. He came to this room 15 years ago, full of love and hope and plans for a new future. But this room showed him the truth. It showed him what would happen if he left his wife, if he chose his own happiness over his obligations. It showed him the pain he would cause, the lives he would destroy. And he couldn't bear it. His heart couldn't take the weight of that knowledge. So it stopped. You're saying the room killed him? Sarah asked. That it showed him something that literally stopped his heart? The room shows people the truth of their own souls, Robert replied. Some people can't survive that, but others are changed by it. And a very few, like me, find that they can't leave at all. We become part of this place, guardians of its secrets, witnesses to the transformations it creates. Sarah looked around the room with new eyes. The dust, the stillness, the feeling of wrongness that permeated everything. It was all starting to make a terrible kind of sense. How many others are there? She asked. How many people have died in this room? Died? Many. Become trapped? Just 2 that I know of, myself and... Robert paused, his expression growing dark. And the one who came before me. The one who's been here so long that he's almost forgotten what it was like to be human. Where is he? Sarah looked around as if expecting another figure to materialize from the shadows. Closer than you think, Robert said. This hotel you see is his creation. Every brick, every board, every fixture was built according to his design. Marcus Blackwood didn't buy the Grand Pacific. He is the Grand Pacific. He built it in 1927 specifically to house this room, to create a place where the veil between worlds was thin enough for him to move between them freely. Sarah's phone buzzed in her hand, making her jump. She looked down at the screen. A new message from an unknown number. Get out. Now he's lying. She looked up sharply. Who sent this? Robert's smile faded. It seems we have a problem. Someone doesn't want you to hear the truth. Or maybe someone is trying to warn me that you're the one lying, Sarah shot back. She was scared, more scared than she'd ever been in her life. But she was also angry. She'd come here for a story, for the truth, and everyone seemed determined to feed her conflicting versions of reality. Believe what you want, Robert said, shrugging, but ask yourself this. If I wanted to hurt you, why would I have waited until you were here in this room with a witness? Why not just... The lights went out. The darkness was absolute, thick enough to feel. Sarah couldn't see her hand in front of her face. She heard Ms. Winters scream, heard the sound of something moving in the blackness, heard her own breathing loud and ragged in her ears. Then a new voice spoke, and it was like nothing Sarah had ever heard before. It was old, ancient, with a quality that seemed to vibrate in her bones. You are not invited here, the voice said. You do not belong. Blackwood. Robert's voice came from somewhere to Sarah's left. Leave her alone. She's just a reporter. She doesn't understand what she's walked into. Doesn't she? The ancient voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I think she understands perfectly well. She came seeking secrets. Well, room 13 has many secrets. Perhaps it's time she learned them all. The lights flickered back on, but the room was different now. The furniture was gone, replaced by nothing but bare walls and floor. No, not quite bare. Sarah realized with horror that the walls were covered in writing. Thousands of words, maybe millions, carved and scratched and written in what looked like dried blood. Names, dates, confessions, pleas for help. And standing in the center of the room was a man who made Robert look almost normal by comparison. He was tall, impossibly tall, with skin so pale it seemed translucent. His eyes were entirely black. No whites, no pupils, just endless darkness. He wore a suit that looked like it came from the 1920s, perfectly preserved, without a single wrinkle or stain. Welcome to the true room 13, Marcus Blackwood said. This is what lies beneath the illusion. This is what I've been building for nearly a century. A collection of souls, a library of human experience, a monument to everything people try to hide from themselves. Sarah wanted to run, wanted to scream, but her body wouldn't respond. She was trapped, frozen in place by fear or magic or something else she couldn't name. Why are you doing this? She managed to ask. Blackwood smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing Sarah had ever seen. Because I want to understand. I was human once, a very long time ago, but I gave up my humanity in exchange for knowledge, for the ability to see beyond the veil, to move between worlds. And now I collect stories, experiences, truths. Every person who enters this room, every secret this place reveals, adds to my understanding of what it means to be human. You, Ms. Mitchell, with your desperate desire for a great story, your willingness to risk everything for recognition. You're a perfect addition to my collection. No. Robert stepped forward, putting himself between Sarah and Blackwood. She's not staying. I brought her here to expose you, to finally tell the world what you've done. I've been trapped here for 15 years, watching, waiting for the right person to set everything in motion, as Sarah is that person. Blackwood laughed, and the sound made the walls shake. You think you can stop me? You're a ghost, Robert, a shadow. You have no power here. Maybe not alone, Robert said, but I'm not alone anymore. The air in the room seemed to shimmer, and suddenly there were others there, translucent figures, some more solid than others, filling the space. Men and women, young and old, all with the same look of determination on their faces. "These are the souls you've trapped," Robert said. "Everyone who died in this room, everyone who couldn't escape. They've been waiting, building their strength, preparing for this moment. We're taking back our lives, Blackwood. We're ending this." The battle that followed was like nothing Sarah could have imagined. It wasn't physical, not in any conventional sense. It was a war of wills, of energies, of forces she couldn't begin to understand. Light and darkness swirled through the room, and the walls seemed to pulse with their own terrible life. Sarah found she could move again, and she did the only thing she could think of. She ran. She bolted for the door, Ms. Winters right behind her. They stumbled into the hallway, and Sarah slammed the door shut behind them. But the sounds from inside the room didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder, screaming, shouting, sounds like thunder and breaking glass and howling wind. "We have to call someone," Ms. Winters gasped. "The police, the fire department, someone." "And tell them what?" Sarah shot back. "That room 13 is having a supernatural battle? They'll think we're insane." The door to room 13 was shaking now, the wood splintering as if something was trying to break through from the inside. Sarah and Ms. Winters backed away, and then they ran. They ran down the hallway into the elevator, down to the lobby where Henry stood behind the desk, his face white with terror. "What's happening up there?" he demanded. "The whole building is shaking." "We need to evacuate," Miss Winters said. "Right now. Get everyone out." "There are 37 guests in the hotel tonight," Henry protested. "We can't just—" An explosion of sound cut him off. The chandelier above them swung wildly, and several of the crystals broke free, shattering on the marble floor. The walls groaned as if the building itself was in pain. Then, as suddenly as it had started, everything stopped. The shaking ceased. The sounds from upstairs faded to nothing. The chandelier slowly came to rest, still swaying slightly. Sarah, Ms. Winters, and Henry stared at each other in the sudden silence. "Is it over?" Henry whispered. Before anyone could answer, the elevator dinged. The doors slid open and Robert stepped out. He looked different now, more solid somehow, more real. And he was alone. "It's over," he confirmed. "Blackwood is gone, destroyed. The others, the trapped souls, they're free now. They can move on." "And you?" Sarah asked. "Why are you still here?" Robert smiled, and for the first time it looked genuine. "Because I chose to stay. Someone needs to make sure room 13 never claims another victim. Someone needs to stand guard and prevent others from making the same mistakes Blackwood made. That's my purpose now. That's what I'm here for." He walked toward the door, moving like a man carrying an enormous weight. When he reached it, he turned back to look at them. "Tell the story, Sarah Mitchell," he said. "Tell the world about room 13. Tell them about the dangers of obsession, of trying to see beyond what we're meant to see. Tell them that some doors should remain closed. Some secrets are meant to stay hidden. Maybe if enough people know, no one else will be tempted to follow Blackwood's path." Then he was gone, walking out into the rain and disappearing into the night. Sarah stood there, her mind reeling, trying to process everything that had happened. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her notebook and started writing, capturing every detail while it was still fresh in her mind. She had her story. She had the biggest story of her career, maybe the biggest story of the century. But as she wrote, she found herself wondering if anyone would believe it. Would her editor publish it? Would readers accept it as truth? Or dismiss it as fantasy? And more importantly, should she even try to tell this story? Robert had asked her to warn people, to prevent others from following Blackwood's path. But Sarah knew human nature. Warning sometimes had the opposite effect. Tell people not to do something, and suddenly they couldn't resist trying it. Ms. Winter sank into one of the lobby chairs, looking 20 years older than she had an hour ago. "What are we going to do?" she asked. "How do we explain any of this?" "We don't," Sarah said slowly, making a decision even as she spoke. "We seal off room 13. We lock it, board it up if necessary, and we make sure no one goes near it ever again." "But the story?" "Will be told," Sarah finished, "but carefully, selectively. I'll write it in a way that makes people think twice before seeking out places like this. I'll make them understand the danger without making it sound appealing." Henry cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know. When the building was shaking, I checked the security cameras. There are no cameras on the second floor, but the ones in the lobby caught something. Right before Robert came down, there was a flash of light from the direction of the elevator. And in that flash, he pulled up footage on the computer and turned the screen so Sarah could see. Look." Sarah leaned in, studying the grainy image. In the wash of white light, she could see dozens of figures. They were transparent, barely there, but unmistakable. People of all ages, all dressed in different styles from different eras, and they were smiling. "The trapped souls," Sarah breathed. "They really are free." She looked back at her notes, at the words she'd scribbled down in her rushed handwriting. This was just the beginning. There was so much more to investigate, so many questions still unanswered. Who else knew about room 13? Were there other places like it? How many people had Blackwood hurt over the decades? But those were questions for another day. Right now, Sarah needed to figure out how to tell this first part of the story, how to share the truth without causing more harm. She spent the next several hours in the hotel lobby interviewing Miss Winters and Henry, taking detailed notes about the history of the Grand Pacific, about the rumors and legends that had accumulated over the years. Miss Winters, once she started talking, couldn't seem to stop. It was as if a dam had broken, and years of suppressed truth came flooding out. She told Sarah about the other strange incidents at the hotel. Guests who checked out early claiming they heard voices. Staff members who quit without explanation. The time a renovation team found a hidden passage behind the walls of the second floor, leading to a small room that wasn't on any of the building's original blueprints. A room that contained nothing but a chair and a mirror, both covered in the same strange writing that Sarah had seen on the walls of the true room 13. "We sealed it up again," Ms. Winters said. "Pretended we never found it. The board of directors decided it was better not to know, better not to ask questions. We just wanted to run a normal hotel, serve normal guests, and forget that there was anything unusual about the building." "But you couldn't forget," Sarah said gently. "Could you?" Ms. Winters shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "Not after Robert died. Not after I saw his body, saw the terror on his face. He died afraid, Sarah. Whatever he saw in that room, whatever truth it showed him, it was so terrible that his heart just gave up. And I've lived with that for 15 years, wondering if there was something I could have done, some way I could have saved him." "It wasn't your fault," Sarah said. "Robert made his own choices. He went into that room knowing there was something strange about it. He was curious, just like Blackwood was curious all those years ago. And curiosity, well, sometimes it has a price. As dawn broke over the city, Sarah finally left the Grand Pacific Hotel. She walked through streets still wet from the rain, her notebook clutched to her chest, her mind full of images and words and questions. She went straight to her apartment, a small studio on the third floor of an old building that was nowhere near as historic or interesting as the Grand Pacific. She made coffee, sat down at her desk, and opened her laptop. The blank document stared back at her, cursor blinking expectantly. Sarah took a deep breath and started to type. She wrote for hours, barely stopping to eat or drink. The words poured out of her like water from a broken dam, and she found herself writing with a clarity and purpose she'd never experienced before. This wasn't just a story. This was a warning, a testimony, a piece of truth that the world needed to hear. But as she wrote, she also became aware of something else. A presence, faint but definite, watching her work. She looked up from her screen, scanning her small apartment, but saw nothing unusual. Still, the feeling persisted. "Robert?" she called out softly. "Is that you?" For a moment, nothing. Then the air beside her desk seemed to shimmer, and there he was. Not as solid as he'd been in the hotel, but there nonetheless. A ghost, an echo, a guardian spirit, watching over the story being told. "I wanted to make sure you understood," he said, his voice distant, like it was coming from far away. "Room 13 isn't the only place like this. There are others, scattered around the world. Places where the veil is thin, where people seek forbidden knowledge or try to see beyond what they should. Blackwood found one and tried to control it, to use it for his own purposes. But he wasn't the first, and he won't be the last." "Are you saying there are more people like him out there?" Sarah asked. "More people trying to trap souls and collect secrets?" "I'm saying the world is stranger than most people realize," Robert replied. "And there are those who would exploit that strangeness, who would use it for power or knowledge, or simply because they can. Your story about Room 13 is important, but it's only one chapter in a much larger book." "Then I'll keep digging," Sarah said. "I'll find the other chapters. I'll expose everyone who's doing what Blackwood did." Robert's expression grew sad. "Be careful, Sarah. The more you learn, the more danger you'll be in. There are forces at work that don't want these secrets revealed. People, if they can still be called people, who will do anything to keep their activities hidden." "I'm not afraid," Sarah said, though her voice shook slightly. "This is what I'm meant to do. This is my purpose." "Just like it was Blackwood's purpose," Robert pointed out. "Just like it was my purpose to seek truth in Room 13. Be careful that your search for truth doesn't consume you the way it consumed us." He faded then, becoming more transparent until Sarah couldn't see him at all. But his words lingered, a warning and a prophecy that she couldn't shake. She returned to her writing, but with a new sense of caution. She had to be smart about this. She had to tell the story in a way that informed without sensationalizing, that warned without tempting. It was a delicate balance, and she wasn't sure she could pull it off. 3 days later, Sarah submitted her article to her editor at the newspaper. She titled it, "The Secret in Room 13, a True Account of the Grand Pacific Hotel." She'd included photos, testimonies from Ms. Winters and Henry, historical research about the building, and her own account of what had happened that night. Her editor, a man named Tom Richardson, who'd been in the newspaper business for 30 years, called her into his office the next morning. "Sarah," he said, gesturing for her to sit down, "we need to talk about your article." "Is there a problem?" Sarah asked, though she already knew the answer. She could see it in his face, in the way he couldn't quite meet her eyes. "It's well written," Tom said carefully, "very compelling. But, Sarah, you're asking me to publish a story about ghosts and supernatural forces and a hotel room that traps souls. You have to understand how that sounds." "I have evidence," Sarah protested. "Photos, witnesses, historical records. None of which proves anything supernatural," Tom interrupted. "Look, I believe you had some kind of experience at that hotel, and I believe the hotel has a strange history, but ghosts, battles between spirits, a building designed to thin the veil between worlds, that's the stuff of fiction, not journalism." "So you won't publish it?" Tom sighed. "I can't publish it as written. But if you want to rewrite it, focus on the history and the mysterious death. Leave out the more fantastical elements. Then maybe we can work with it." Sarah stood up, anger rising in her chest. "You want me to water it down, to tell only part of the truth?" "I want you to tell the truth in a way that people will believe," Tom countered. "That's what good journalism is about. If you write about ghosts, people will dismiss the entire story as fiction. But if you write about an unsolved death, a strange hotel, rumors and legends that might have some basis in fact, that's something people can accept." Sarah left Tom's office without agreeing to anything. She walked the streets for hours, wrestling with the decision. Should she compromise? Tell a sanitized version of the story that would actually get published? Or should she stick to her guns? Tell the full truth, even if it meant the story never saw print in a mainstream publication. In the end, she did both. She rewrote the article for the newspaper, focusing on the historical facts and leaving most of the supernatural elements as alleged or rumored. It was published 2 weeks later, a respectable piece about an old hotel and an unsolved mystery. But Sarah also wrote the full version, every detail exactly as she'd experienced it. She posted it on her personal blog, a site that had maybe 100 regular readers. She didn't expect it to go viral or change the world. She just wanted the truth to be out there, somewhere for anyone who cared to look for it. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within 24 hours, her blog post had been shared thousands of times. People from around the world started leaving comments, sharing their own experiences with places like Room 13, hotels, houses, hospitals, libraries. There were dozens of locations where people reported similar phenomena. Strange rooms that changed people, places where the veil between worlds seemed thin, sites of mysterious deaths and unexplained occurrences. Sarah started cataloging everything, creating a database of these locations and the stories associated with them. It became an obsession, consuming all her free time and most of her energy. She would stay up until 3 a.m. researching old newspaper archives, reaching out to witnesses, trying to find patterns and connections. 2 months after her experience at the Grand Pacific Hotel, Sarah received a package at her apartment. There was no return address, just her name and address written in elegant handwriting on the plain brown paper. Inside was the leather-bound book, old and heavy with pages that smelled of dust and age. A note was tucked inside the front cover. "Ms. Mitchell, your work has been noticed. This book contains the locations of 37 places similar to Room 13. Some are dormant, some are active, Some are more dangerous than anything you've encountered so far. Use this information wisely, but be warned. Those who guard these secrets do not take kindly to exposure. Watch your back. A friend. Sarah held the book, her hands trembling. This was it. This was the confirmation she'd been seeking. Proof that she was on the right track. But it was also terrifying. Someone out there knew what she was doing. Someone was either helping her or setting her up for something worse. She opened the book to the first page and started reading. The entries were detailed, precise, listing not just locations but also histories, known victims, and assessments of danger levels. Whoever had compiled this information had spent years, maybe decades, gathering it. The second location listed made Sarah's blood run cold. It was a psychiatric hospital just 50 miles from her city, abandoned for 20 years. The entry described it as extremely active and noted that 7 people had died there under mysterious circumstances. The note added, "Caution advised. Entity present is hostile and powerful." Sarah made a decision then that would change the course of her life. She was going to visit that hospital. She was going to investigate every location in the book. She was going to expose the truth about these places and the forces that inhabited them, no matter what the cost. But first, she needed help. She couldn't do this alone. She needed people who understood what she was dealing with, people who had their own experiences with the unexplained. She started by reaching out to the people who had commented on her blog posts, the ones who had shared the most detailed stories. She was cautious, not revealing too much at first, but gradually building trust and gathering a network of contacts. One name kept coming up in her research: Dr. Elena Vasquez, a parapsychologist who had been studying unexplained phenomena for 30 years. Dr. Vasquez had published several books on the subject, though they were dismissed by mainstream science as pseudoscience and speculation. Sarah sent Dr. Vasquez an email, briefly explaining her experience at the Grand Pacific Hotel and asking if they could meet. To her surprise, she received a response within an hour. "Ms. Mitchell, I've been following your work with great interest. I've been waiting for someone like you, someone with the courage to pursue these stories and the skill to document them properly. Yes, we should meet, but not by email or phone. These channels are not secure. Come to my office at the university. Come tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Tell no one where you're going. There are people who would prefer that we not speak. Best regards, Elena Vasquez." The paranoid tone of the email should have been a red flag, but Sarah had already seen enough to know that paranoia wasn't always unjustified. She cleared her schedule for the next day and made arrangements to visit Dr. Vasquez. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Room 13 and Robert Chen and Marcus Blackwood. She thought about the book of locations that someone had sent her, about all the people who had died or been changed by these thin places in the world. And she thought about what Robert had said. Be careful that your search for truth doesn't consume you. Was she becoming obsessed? Was she heading down the same path that had destroyed Blackwood? Sarah didn't know. All she knew was that she couldn't stop now. She'd seen behind the curtain, glimpsed the hidden world that existed alongside the everyday one, and there was no going back to ignorance. A sound from her living room made her sit up suddenly. It was faint, like the whisper of cloth against cloth, but in the silence of the night it seemed loud. Sarah grabbed her phone, ready to call the police, and crept to her bedroom door. The living room was dark, illuminated only by the street light outside her window. At first, Sarah saw nothing unusual. Then her eyes adjusted and she realized she wasn't alone. A figure stood by her desk, looking at her laptop screen. It was a woman, middle-aged, dressed in what looked like a nurse's uniform from the 1950s. She was translucent, barely there, but Sarah could see her clearly enough to notice the sad expression on her face. "Who are you?" Sarah whispered. The woman turned to look at her, and Sarah saw that her eyes were hollow, empty sockets filled with shadow. "You're writing about the places," the woman said, her voice echoing strangely, as if coming from a great distance. "The thin places, the rooms and buildings where the veil is weak." "Yes," Sarah managed to say, "I'm trying to warn people, to help people understand." The woman nodded slowly. "Good, that's good, but you need to know it. There are worse things than room 13. There are places where the veil isn't just thin, it's broken, shattered. Places where things from the other side have pushed through and made homes in our world." "Like where?" Sarah asked. "Tell me where these places are." "The hospital," the woman said. "The Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital. That's where I died. That's where I'm still trapped, even though I can sometimes slip away for brief moments like this. The thing that lives there, it's not like Marcus Blackwood. It's older, hungrier, more patient." "What is it?" Sarah asked, though part of her didn't want to know. "It doesn't have a name, not anymore. It gave up its name when it gave up its humanity thousands of years ago. It feeds on suffering, on fear, on the darkest parts of human nature. The hospital was built on a site where terrible things happened, where the veil was already weak. And over the decades, all the pain and suffering of the patients there made it weaker still. Now the thing lives in the walls, in the foundations, in the very essence of the building, and it waits for anyone foolish enough to enter." "I'm planning to go there," Sarah said, "to investigate, to document what's happening." The woman's form flickered, becoming even more transparent. "Then you're going to die," she said simply. "Just like I did, just like everyone who goes there seeking answers. The thing doesn't let people leave, not alive, not sane, not whole." "Then why are you telling me this?" Sarah demanded. "Why warn me if there's no hope?" "Because there might be a way," the woman replied. "If you're strong enough, if you're smart enough, if you can find the heart of the building, the place where the veil was first broken, you might be able to seal it. You might be able to trap the thing on one side or the other, prevent it from crossing between worlds. But it would require sacrifice. It would require someone willing to stand as a barrier, to give up their life or their freedom or their humanity to hold the seal in place." "Like Robert Chen," Sarah said quietly. "He chose to stay in room 13 to prevent others from being trapped there." "Robert Chen is a guardian," the woman confirmed. "One of many scattered across the world, holding the line against things that would break through if given the chance. But there aren't enough guardians. There are too many thin places, too many broken veils, and more are appearing all the time as humanity spreads and builds and disturbs places that should have been left alone." The woman's form was fading rapidly now, becoming little more than a shimmer in the darkness. "Remember what I told you," she said, her voice barely audible. "The Blackwood Hospital is a trap. If you go there, be prepared to never leave. Be prepared to become a guardian yourself, standing watch for eternity against a thing that will never stop trying to break free." Then she was gone, and Sarah was alone in her dark apartment, her heart pounding and her mind racing. She didn't sleep that night. Instead, she sat at her desk and researched the Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital. What she found was disturbing. The hospital had been built in 1952 on the site of an old tuberculosis sanatorium that had burned down under mysterious circumstances. Before the sanatorium, there had been a workhouse for the poor, and before that, in the colonial era, it had been the site of a prison where prisoners were often tortured and executed. The hospital itself had a dark history. Over the 43 years it operated, there were documented cases of patient abuse, illegal experiments, and at least 7 suspicious deaths. It was finally shut down in 1995 after a major scandal involving a doctor who had been conducting unauthorized psychological experiments on patients without their consent. Since then, the building had stood empty. Local urban explorers sometimes ventured inside, and their reports were consistently disturbing. People felt watched. They heard voices. Some reported seeing shadowy figures in the hallways. Several explorers had been found unconscious outside the building, with no memory of what had happened to them inside. 2 people had died there in the years since it closed. One was a teenager on a dare who fell down an elevator shaft. The other was a homeless man who'd been seeking shelter and was found dead of apparent heart failure in one of the basement rooms, his face frozen in an expression of absolute terror. Sarah copied all the information she could find into her notes, then started planning her approach. She would need equipment: cameras, recording devices, flashlights, backup batteries. She would need a safety plan, someone who knew where she was going, a check-in schedule, an escape route. She would need protection, salt, iron, religious symbols if they worked, anything that folklore suggested might defend against supernatural threats. But most of all, she needed to understand what she was walking into, and for that, she needed to talk to Dr. Vasquez. The next afternoon, Sarah arrived at the university where Dr. Vasquez taught. The campus was sprawling and old, with ivy-covered buildings and tree-lined paths that would have seemed peaceful if not for Sarah's growing sense of dread. Dr. Vasquez's office was in the psychology department, a Gothic-style building that looked like it belonged in a horror movie. Sarah climbed the narrow stairs to the 3rd floor and found the office at the end of a dimly lit hallway. She knocked, and a voice called out, "Come in, Ms. Mitchell. I've been expecting you." Sarah opened the door and stepped into what could only be described as organized chaos. Every surface was covered with books, papers, strange artifacts, and scientific equipment. The walls were plastered with maps, charts, and photographs of various locations. It looked like the lair of a mad scientist, or perhaps a very dedicated researcher who had long ago given up on appearances. Dr. Vasquez herself was a small woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair pulled back in a practical bun and sharp, dark eyes that seemed to see right through Sarah. She wore a cardigan covered in cat hair and reading glasses on a chain around her neck. "Sit," Dr. Vasquez said, gesturing to a chair that was mercifully free of clutter. "Would you like tea? Coffee? I'm afraid I can't offer much else. I tend to work through meals and forget about such things." "I'm fine, thank you," Sarah said, sitting down carefully. "Dr. Vasquez, I appreciate you agreeing to meet with me. Please call me Elena, and I should be thanking you. Your article about Room 13 was the most accurate account of a thin place phenomenon I've seen in years. Most people either sensationalize everything or try to explain it away with rational explanations that don't fit the facts. You did neither. You simply reported what you experienced. That takes courage and integrity. I'm planning to investigate another location, Sarah said, deciding to get straight to the point. The Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital. Do you know anything about it? Elena's expression darkened. I know a great deal about it, unfortunately. I've been monitoring that location for 20 years, trying to find a way to neutralize the threat it poses. So far, I've failed. The entity there is beyond anything I've encountered elsewhere. What is it? Sarah asked. The woman who appeared to me last night, the ghost, she said it gave up its name and humanity thousands of years ago. You saw a manifestation? Elena leaned forward, suddenly intent. That's significant. Entities connected to the Blackwood Hospital rarely show themselves outside its walls. Whoever this was must have been desperate to warn you. She said she died there, that she's trapped there, and that if I go there to investigate, I'll die too. Elena nodded slowly. She's probably right. The Blackwood Hospital has a 100% mortality rate for serious investigators. People who just wander in out of curiosity might leave shaken but alive. But anyone who goes there deliberately seeking to understand or challenge the entity, they don't come out. Not in any meaningful sense. Then why would you monitor it for 20 years? Sarah asked. Why study something that's so dangerous? Because ignorance is more dangerous than knowledge, Elena replied. Because if we don't understand these entities, we can't develop strategies to contain them. And because... She hesitated, then continued. Because someone has to. Someone has to keep watch, maintain records, warn others away from the most dangerous locations. It's not a job I wanted, but it's one I inherited. Inherited? Sarah prompted. Elena stood and walked to one of the walls, pulling down an old photograph. It showed a man in his 50s wearing clothing from the 1960s, standing in front of what Sarah recognized as the Grand Pacific Hotel. This is my mentor, Dr. Thomas Winters, Elena said. He spent his entire career studying thin places and the entities that inhabit them. He was brilliant, dedicated, and ultimately destroyed by his work. He became so obsessed with understanding these phenomena that he stopped being able to live a normal life. He died alone in his apartment, surrounded by his research, having pushed away everyone who cared about him. Winters? Sarah said sharply. Is he related to Diana Winters, the woman who works at the Grand Pacific? Her grandfather, Elena confirmed. The family has a long history with these places. Thomas Winters was the one who first identified Room 13 as a thin place and attempted to study it. His research eventually passed to me after his death, and I've been continuing his work ever since. She replaced the photograph and turned back to Sarah. That's why I wanted to meet you in person, to warn you, to tell you what this path costs. You think you're just a journalist writing a story, but you're already in deeper than you realize. Once you've seen behind the veil, once you know these places exist, you can't unknow it. It will consume your life, just as it consumed Thomas Winters' life and is consuming mine. But you keep doing the work, Sarah pointed out, despite the cost. Because someone has to, Elena repeated. But that doesn't mean it should be you. You're young. You have your whole life ahead of you. You could write other stories, build a normal career, have a family, all the things that people like Thomas and I gave up. You don't have to follow this path. Sarah thought about Room 13, about Robert Chen standing guard for eternity, about the trapped souls finally set free. She thought about the book of locations that someone had sent her, about all the other places where people were suffering, trapped, or in danger. I have to, she said quietly. Not because I want to, but because I can't not do it. I've seen the truth. I know these places exist. How can I just walk away and pretend everything is normal when people are dying, when entities are hurting and trapping and destroying lives? Elena smiled sadly. That's exactly what Thomas said. And what I said 30 years ago when he tried to warn me away. Very well. If you're determined to do this, then at least let me help you. Let me share what I know, give you the tools and knowledge that might keep you alive a little longer. For the next several hours, Elena taught Sarah everything she knew about thin places, about entities, about protection methods and documentation techniques. Sarah filled page after page of her notebook with information that ranged from practical to bizarre. Some entities, Elena explained, were simply human souls who had become trapped between worlds. These were usually harmless, though sad and sometimes desperate. Others were humans who had deliberately given up their humanity in exchange for power or knowledge, like Marcus Blackwood. These were dangerous but could sometimes be reasoned with or fought. But the worst were the things that had never been human at all. Ancient entities that existed before humanity, or perhaps from other dimensions entirely. Things that saw humans as food or toys or simply obstacles to be removed. The entity at the Blackwood Hospital was one of these. It's been there for a very long time, Elena said, possibly predating the hospital by centuries. The first documented encounter was in 1743, when colonial settlers reported strange occurrences at the site. People disappearing. Sounds of screaming from the earth itself. Animals refusing to go near the area. So the hospital wasn't built there by accident, Sarah said, understanding clicking into place. Someone knew about the entity, someone wanted to use it. Exactly, I've traced the chain of ownership of that land back through multiple generations. Every owner has been connected to occult groups or had interest in the supernatural. They've been feeding the entity deliberately, bringing vulnerable people to that site and allowing it to prey on them. That's monstrous, Sarah breathed. How can people do that? Fear, mostly, Elena replied. The entity offers protection to those who serve it. It grants certain favors, and it severely punishes anyone who tries to interfere with its feeding. Several people have tried to expose the truth over the years. Most of them are dead. The ones who survived are in psychiatric facilities themselves, broken by what the entity did to their minds. Are you saying I shouldn't go there? Sarah asked. That there's no point? I'm saying you should understand what you're facing, Elena corrected. If you go to the Blackwood Hospital, you need to be prepared for several possibilities. 1, you don't come out at all. The entity traps you there and you become another of its permanent victims. 2, you come out physically but not mentally, broken by what you experienced. 3, you come out and the entity follows you, making the rest of your life a living hell as it punishes you for interfering. Or 4, you somehow manage to defeat or contain it, but only by sacrificing something precious, usually your own freedom or humanity. Those are all terrible options, Sarah said. Yes, Elena agreed. Which is why I've never been inside the hospital myself. I've studied it from outside, interviewed survivors, examined the history, but I've never crossed the threshold, and neither should you. Sarah was quiet for a long moment, weighing everything Elena had told her. Then she looked up and met the older woman's eyes. I appreciate all this information, I really do, and I understand the risks, but I'm still going. Not tomorrow, not next week, but soon. Because someone needs to document what's happening there. Someone needs to try to stop it. And if not me, then who? Elena sighed deeply. Then at least let me prepare you properly. Come back tomorrow. I'll have equipment ready for you. Proper protection, backup plans, and... She hesitated, then continued. And I'll go with you. What? No, you just said... I know what I said, Elena interrupted, but I can't let you go alone. If you're determined to do this foolish, brave, stupid thing, then at least you'll have someone watching your back. Someone who knows what to look for and how to respond. Sarah felt a surge of gratitude and relief. Thank you, I don't know what to say. Don't thank me yet, Elena said grimly. We might both regret this decision. Now go home. Rest. Prepare yourself mentally for what's coming. And don't tell anyone where you're going. The fewer people who know, the safer everyone will be. Sarah left Elena's office as dusk was falling over the campus. She walked back to her apartment in a daze, her mind full of everything she'd learned. Ancient entities, feeding grounds, people who deliberately brought victims to these places. It was bigger than she'd imagined, so much bigger. Room 13 wasn't an isolated phenomenon. It was part of a vast hidden world that existed alongside the everyday one. A world of dangers and mysteries that most people never even suspected. When Sarah got home, she found another message waiting on her blog. This one was different from the others, written in the same elegant handwriting as the note that had accompanied the book of locations. Ms. Mitchell, I see you're moving forward with your investigation. Good. The Blackwood Hospital needs to be exposed. But before you go there, you should know. There are others watching your progress. Not all of them wish you well. Some would prefer that places like the hospital remain hidden, their secrets buried. Watch for signs of interference. Trust no one completely. And remember, the entity at the hospital is ancient and intelligent. It knows you're coming. It's waiting for you. Good luck. Sarah read the message 3 times, feeling a chill run down her spine. Someone was watching her. Someone knew her plans before she even fully made them. Was it a friend trying to help, or an enemy laying a trap? She spent the rest of the evening reviewing everything she knew, making lists of questions, preparing herself mentally for what was to come. She wrote letters to her parents and her sister, explaining where she was going and why, to be delivered only if she didn't return. She updated her will. She backed up all her research to multiple cloud storage sites, ensuring that even if something happened to her, the information would survive. As midnight approached, Sarah stood at her window, looking out at the city lights. Somewhere out there, 50 miles away, the Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital stood empty and waiting. In less than 24 hours, she would be inside its walls, facing something that had terrified and destroyed countless people before her. She should have been scared. She was scared. But she was also determined. This was her purpose now. This was what she was meant to do. Sarah Mitchell, journalist and seeker of truth, was about to walk into the darkest place she'd ever encountered. And whether she came out again, and what she might bring back with her, remained to be seen. The rain started again as she stood there. Drops pattering against the window like fingers tapping. like someone trying to get her attention, like a warning she couldn't quite hear. In room 13 of the Grand Pacific Hotel, Robert Chen felt the shift in the air. Something was moving. Something was waking up. The balance he'd been maintaining for 15 years was about to be tested in ways he couldn't prevent. "Be careful, Sarah Mitchell," he whispered to the empty room. "The darkness ahead is deeper than you know." And in the abandoned halls of the Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital, in a basement room that should have been empty, something ancient and hungry stirred. It had felt her attention. It had tasted her determination. And it smiled, or at least did whatever passed for smiling in something that had given up its humanity thousands of years ago. Fresh prey was coming, aware prey, challenging prey. Finally, after so many years of feeding on the weak and the lost, something interesting was about to happen. The entity settled deeper into the foundations of the building and waited. Time meant nothing to something as old as it was. It could wait another day, another week, another century, but somehow it knew it wouldn't have to wait long. Sarah Mitchell was coming, and when she arrived, the real story would begin. The night deepened over the city, and in a dozen different places, some known to Sarah, some still hidden, other entities stirred. The Grand Pacific wasn't alone. The Blackwood Hospital wasn't alone. They were part of a network, a web of thin places and hungry things that stretched across the world. And Sarah Mitchell, without fully realizing it, had just declared war on all of them. Elena Vasquez pressed her hands over her ears, but it did nothing to block out the sound that seemed to come from inside her own skull. The basement of the Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital was pitch black despite the high-powered flashlights they'd brought, as if the darkness here was something physical, something that could swallow light. Beside her, Sarah was frozen in place, her eyes wide with terror, staring at something Elena couldn't see. "Sarah," Elena shouted over the screaming. "Sarah, look at me. Focus on my voice." But Sarah didn't respond. She was somewhere else now, trapped in whatever vision the entity was showing her. Elena had seen this before years ago, when she'd tried to help another researcher who'd gotten too close to one of these places. That researcher had never fully recovered, spending the rest of her life in a psychiatric facility, mumbling about things that existed between the walls. Elena grabbed Sarah's shoulders and shook her hard. "Come back. You have to come back now." The screaming stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving a silence that was somehow worse. In that silence, Elena heard footsteps. Slow, deliberate footsteps coming from deeper in the basement, from places they hadn't explored yet, from places she desperately didn't want to explore. "We need to leave," Elena said urgently. "Right now. This was a mistake. We're not ready for this." Sarah blinked, and suddenly she was back, her eyes focusing on Elena's face. "I saw them," she whispered. "All of them. Everyone who died here. They're still here, Elena. They're trapped in the walls, in the floors, in the very foundation of this building, and they're begging for help." "I know," Elena said, pulling Sarah toward the stairs, "but we can't help them if we become trapped too. Move, now." But it was already too late. The door at the top of the stairs slammed shut with a sound like a gunshot. The flashlights flickered and died, and they were plunged into absolute darkness. "Elena!" Sarah's voice was small and frightened in the blackness. "I'm here. Don't move. Don't make a sound." The footsteps were closer now, and with them came a smell like rotting flowers and old blood. Elena's hand found the pouch she wore around her neck. the one filled with salt and iron filings and other things that were supposed to provide protection. But her hands were shaking so badly she couldn't get it open. Then the entity spoke, and its voice was like rocks grinding together, like nails on a chalkboard, like every unpleasant sound in the world combined into something that could form words. "Welcome," it said. "I've been waiting for you, both of you, the seeker of knowledge and the teller of stories. You'll make excellent additions to my collection." 24 hours earlier, Sarah had been sitting in Elena's office, going over the plan one more time. The supplies were spread out on the desk: flashlights, batteries, recording equipment, cameras, protective talismans, salt, iron, and a dozen other items that Elena insisted they needed. "The most important thing is to stick to the schedule," Elena said, marking times on a map of the hospital. "We go in at noon when the sun is highest. Natural light doesn't penetrate much into the hospital, but every little bit helps. We have exactly 3 hours. At 3 o'clock, no matter where we are or what we're doing, we leave. No exceptions." "What happens at 3 o'clock?" Sarah asked. "Nothing specific, but the longer you stay in a place like this, the harder it becomes to leave. The entity gets into your head, makes you lose track of time, convinces you to explore just one more room. People who stay past sunset almost never come out. So we set a hard limit and we stick to it." Sarah nodded, making notes. "And if we get separated?" "We don't get separated. We stay within sight of each other at all times. If you can't see me, stop moving and call out. I'll find you." Elena paused, her expression grave. "But Sarah, if something happens to me, if I get taken or trapped or changed, you run. You get out as fast as you can and you never come back. Do you understand?" "I'm not leaving you behind," Sarah protested. "Yes, you are," Elena said firmly. "Because if you don't, we both die. And then no one will know what happened here. No one will be able to warn others. The work we do, the research, the documentation, it's bigger than either of us individually. The information has to survive even if we don't." It was a sobering thought. But Sarah understood the logic. She'd already made arrangements for her research to be published automatically if she didn't check in within 72 hours. Everything she knew about Room 13, about thin places, about the network of entities across the world, would become public knowledge. "There's something else you need to know," Elena said, pulling out an old leather journal similar to the one Sarah had seen in Room 13. "I've been keeping records of everyone who's entered the Blackwood Hospital in the last 20 years. Most of them were just curious teenagers or urban explorers. They went in, got scared, and left. But 17 people went in as serious investigators, people trying to understand or document or challenge the entity. Of those 17, 3 are dead, 9 are in psychiatric facilities, and 5 are missing." "What happened to them?" Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. "The dead ones are the lucky ones, if you can call it luck. Quick deaths, usually from falls or apparent heart attacks. But the autopsy showed something strange. Their brains had physically changed, developed lesions and abnormalities that couldn't be explained by any known disease. It's as if their brains had been rewritten. And the ones in psychiatric facilities? They're alive but not living," Elena said sadly. "They don't speak. Or if they do, it's in languages no one recognizes. They draw the same symbols over and over. They scream when anyone tries to take them near windows or doors. It's like their minds got stuck somewhere between this world and whatever exists on the other side of the veil. And the missing ones? Elena hesitated. I think they're still in the hospital. Not in any physical sense, but trapped, absorbed, become part of the entity's collection. There have been reports of people hearing voices in the hospital that sound like the missing investigators, calling out for help, begging to be found. But when people search, there's never anyone there. Sarah felt a chill run through her. Why are you telling me this now? Trying to scare me out of going? No, Elena said. I'm telling you because you need to understand what we're facing. This isn't like room 13 where the entity was contained and could be fought. The thing at Blackwood Hospital is vast and powerful and has been feeding for centuries. We're not going there to fight it. We're going there to learn about it, to document it, and hopefully to find some weakness we can exploit later. Later? Sarah repeated. You mean you're already planning a second trip? If we survive the first one, yes. Understanding an entity like this takes time. Multiple visits, careful observation, pattern analysis. One trip won't be enough to figure out how to stop it. Sarah thought about the ghost who had appeared in her apartment, the woman in the nurse's uniform who had warned her about the hospital. The ghost I saw said there might be a way to seal the veil, to trap the entity on one side or the other. Theoretically possible, Elena agreed, but it would require finding the exact spot where the veil was first broken, and then... She trailed off. And then someone would have to stay there, Sarah finished. Like Robert Chen stayed in room 13. Someone would have to become a guardian. Yes, and it would have to be someone with a strong will, strong enough to resist the entity's influence for years, decades, maybe centuries. Most people can't withstand that kind of psychological pressure. They break, and when they break, the seal breaks too. They spent the rest of the morning going over contingency plans and emergency protocols. Elena had a colleague, another researcher named Dr. James Park, who would be their safety net. If Sarah and Elena didn't check in by 4 o'clock, Dr. Park would call the police and provide them with exact coordinates and instructions. Will the police be able to help? Sarah asked skeptically. Probably not, Elena admitted, but at least someone will know where we were. At least our bodies might be found if it comes to that. It was a grim thought, but Sarah appreciated Elena's honesty. Too many people investigating these phenomena had vanished without a trace, leaving their loved ones with nothing but questions and uncertainty. At 11:30, they loaded their equipment into Elena's car, an old Honda that had seen better days. The drive to the Blackwood Hospital took 40 minutes, through gradually deteriorating neighborhoods and eventually out into an area that had been largely abandoned by development. The hospital sat on a hill, surrounded by overgrown grounds and a rusted chain-link fence that had been cut open in multiple places. The building itself was a sprawling 3-story structure in the brutalist style, all concrete and sharp angles, with broken windows that looked like empty eye sockets staring down at them. Sarah felt her stomach clench as she looked at it. Even from the parking area, even in broad daylight, there was something wrong about the building. It seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, creating a pocket of shadow around itself that defied natural explanation. Second thoughts? Elena asked quietly. Too many to count, Sarah admitted, but I'm still going in. They gathered their equipment, backpacks with supplies, chest-mounted cameras to record everything, handheld flashlights with backup batteries, and what Elena called the emergency kit, a small bag containing flares, a whistle, and a length of rope. "What's the rope for?" Sarah asked. "If the entity tries to disorient us, we can tie ourselves together. It's harder to get separated that way. And if one of us falls, the other can help pull them up." They tied one end of the rope to Sarah's belt and the other to Elena's, leaving about 10 feet of slack between them. It felt awkward and restrictive, but Sarah understood the necessity. "Ready?" Elena asked, checking her watch. "It's noon exactly, 3 hours. We leave at 3 o'clock no matter what." "Ready?" Sarah lied, because she didn't think she'd ever be truly ready for this. They approached the main entrance, a heavy metal door that hung slightly ajar. Someone had spray-painted a warning on the concrete beside it. "Stay out. People die here." "Subtle," Sarah muttered. "Smart," Elena corrected. Someone who survived their encounter tried to warn others. "Always pay attention to warnings like this." Elena pushed the door open and they stepped inside. The entrance hall was vast and dark, with a ceiling that seemed higher than it should be based on the building's exterior. The floor was littered with debris, broken furniture, scattered papers, chunks of fallen plaster. Graffiti covered the walls, most of it the usual tags and profanity, but some of it stranger. Symbols that Sarah didn't recognize, words in languages she couldn't identify, and drawings, crude but disturbing, of things with too many limbs and faces that were almost human but not quite. "Stay close," Elena whispered, even though there was no apparent reason to whisper. But the atmosphere demanded it somehow, as if speaking too loudly might wake something that was better left sleeping. They moved deeper into the building, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. The beam of light seemed weaker here, as if the shadows were pushing back against it. Sarah's chest-mounted camera was recording everything, but she wondered if the footage would even be usable. There was something about this place that seemed to resist documentation, as if it didn't want to be seen or understood. The first floor appeared to have been mostly administrative offices and common areas. They found a reception desk, patient records scattered across the floor, a cafeteria with tables still set up as if people had just stepped away for a moment. But there was dust everywhere, thick and undisturbed, suggesting that no one had been here in years. "Where do we start?" Sarah asked, her voice sounding too loud in the oppressive silence. "The basement," Elena said. "That's where the entity is strongest, according to my research. That's where most of the deaths and disappearances occurred. If we're going to understand this place, we need to go to its heart." Sarah had been afraid she'd say that. Every horror movie, every ghost story, every cautionary tale said the same thing. Don't go to the basement. But she was here to document the truth, not to indulge in superstition, even if that superstition was turning out to be terrifyingly accurate. They found a stairwell near the back of the building. The door was heavy and stuck, requiring both of them to pull it open. Beyond was a darkness so complete that their flashlights seemed to be absorbed by it. "Stay close," Elena repeated, and they started down. The stairs were concrete, and their footsteps echoed strangely, as if the space around them was much larger than it should be. Sarah counted the steps as they descended. 20 steps should have taken them to the basement level, but they kept going. 30 steps. 40. 50. "Elena," Sarah said, trying to keep the panic out of her voice. "How deep does the basement go?" "It shouldn't be this deep," Elena replied, and for the first time, Sarah heard fear in the older woman's voice. The building plans only showed one. Basement level, maybe 20 feet below ground. We should have reached it by now. But the stairs kept going down. Sarah lost count somewhere around 70 steps. The air was getting colder, and there was a smell now, faint but unpleasant, like something had died and was slowly rotting. Finally, mercifully, the stairs ended. They found themselves in a hallway that stretched in both directions, disappearing into darkness beyond the reach of their flashlights. The walls here were different from upstairs. They looked older, made of stone rather than concrete, with water stains and what might have been mold growing in patches. "This can't be right," Elena muttered, examining the walls. "This stonework looks like it's from the 19th century, maybe earlier, but the hospital was only built in 1952. Maybe they incorporated an older structure," Sarah suggested. "Maybe the hospital was built on top of something that was already here." It was a logical explanation, but it didn't make Sarah feel any better. If anything, it made everything worse. Because if there had been an older building here, why wasn't it in any of the records? What had happened here before the hospital was built? They chose a direction at random and started walking. The hallway seemed to go on forever, with doors on either side. Most of them were closed, but a few stood open, revealing small rooms that might have been cells or storage areas. Sarah photographed everything, trying to capture every detail. That's when they heard the first sound. A soft crying, like a child sobbing in the distance. "Do you hear that?" Sarah whispered. Elena nodded grimly. "Don't follow it. The entity uses sounds to lure people deeper into the building. It's a trap." But even as she said it, Sarah felt the pull. There was a child crying, a child who needed help. How could they just ignore that? "No," Elena said sharply, as if reading Sarah's thoughts. "There's no child. There's nothing here but the entity and us. Remember that." They kept walking, trying to ignore the crying, but it grew louder. And now Sarah could hear words mixed in with the sobs. "Help me. Please help me. I'm so scared. I want to go home." "Block it out," Elena instructed. "Focus on something else. Count your steps. Recite poetry or anything to keep your mind occupied." Sarah tried. She really did. But the voice was so plaintive, so desperate. And then she saw her. A little girl, maybe 7 years old, standing at the end of the hallway. She wore a hospital gown that was too big for her, and her feet were bare. Her face was streaked with tears. "Do you see that?" Sarah asked, pointing. "Yes," Elena said tightly, "but it's not real. It's what the entity wants us to see. Keep walking." They moved toward the girl, not because they wanted to, but because she was blocking the hallway and there was nowhere else to go. As they got closer, Sarah could see more details. The girl's arms were covered in bruises. Her hair was matted and dirty. Her eyes were hollow, haunted. "Help me," the girl said again. "The doctors hurt me. They did bad things. Please, you have to get me out of here." "We can't help you," Elena said firmly. "I'm sorry, but you're not really here. You're just an image, a trick." The girl's face changed. The sadness disappeared, replaced by something cold and calculating. Her eyes went completely black, just like Marcus Blackwood's had been in room 13. When she smiled, her teeth were sharp. "You're right," she said in a voice that was no longer a child's voice. "I'm not really here, but you are, and now you're mine." She lunged at them with impossible speed. Sarah screamed and stumbled backward, but the rope connecting her to Elena jerked tight, keeping her from falling. The girl passed through the space where Sarah had been standing and dissipated like smoke. "Keep moving," Elena shouted. "Don't stop, don't look back." They ran down the hallway, their flashlights bouncing wildly, creating crazy shadows on the walls. Behind them, Sarah could hear laughter, high-pitched and manic. And other sounds, too. Footsteps, doors slamming, voices calling their names. They rounded a corner and found themselves in what looked like an old operating theater. Rows of seats faced a central area where there was a surgical table, complete with restraints and dark stains that Sarah desperately hoped were just rust. "Elena, look at this," Sarah said, her journalist instincts overriding her fear for a moment. She needed to document this. This was evidence of the atrocities that had occurred here. Elena was examining the walls, which were covered in the same strange symbols they'd seen upstairs. These markings? I've seen them before. They're protective sigils, but they're wrong somehow, inverted or corrupted. Protective against what? Sarah asked, taking photographs of the operating theater. Not protective. Summoning, Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. Someone was performing rituals here, using the patients as fuel or sacrifices. That's how the veil got broken. It wasn't an accident. Someone did this deliberately. Sarah felt sick. Why would anyone do that? Power, knowledge, immortality, the same reasons people have always turned to dark forces. Elena checked her watch. We've been here for 45 minutes. We need to start working our way back toward the exit. But as they turned to leave the operating theater, they discovered a problem. The doorway they'd entered through was gone. Instead of an opening, there was just solid wall, as if the door had never existed. "That's not possible," Sarah said, running her hands over the stone. It was real, solid, cold to the touch. "We just came through here." "The entity is playing with us," Elena said, and now there was real fear in her voice. "It's changing the layout of the building, trapping us." "There has to be another way out," Sarah insisted, fighting against rising panic. "There's always another way out." They searched the operating theater and found 2 more doors, both of which led to smaller rooms that appeared to be storage areas. One contained shelves full of old medical equipment, rusted and covered in dust. The other had filing cabinets, most of them empty or filled with papers too deteriorated to read. But in the back of the second room, Sarah found something interesting. A metal grate in the floor about 3 feet square. She knelt down and shined her flashlight through it. "There's another level below this one," she said. "I can see a room down there." "No," Elena said immediately. "Absolutely not. We don't go deeper. That's exactly what the entity wants. But if the building is changing, if the normal exits are blocked, maybe we need to find an unconventional way out. Maybe there's a maintenance tunnel or something down there that leads outside." Elena looked torn. Sarah could see her weighing the options, calculating risks. Finally, she nodded reluctantly. "We look. But if there's no clear path out within 5 minutes, we come back up and try something else." Together they managed to pry open the grate. The opening was narrow, but they could fit through. Sarah went first, lowering herself down carefully until her feet found the floor below. Elena followed, and they found themselves in what appeared to be a much older part of the structure. The walls here were rough stone, definitely not from the 1950s. This was old, colonial-era construction at the earliest, possibly even older. The ceiling was low, barely 6 feet high, and there was water on the floor, ankle-deep and ice-cold, "This is wrong," Elena said. "This is all wrong. The hospital shouldn't have anything like this beneath it." They waded through the water, following what appeared to be a corridor. The water got deeper as they went, rising to mid-calf, then to their knees. Sarah's feet were numb with cold, and she could hear Elena's teeth chattering. That's when they found the bodies. They were pressed into niches in the walls, dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Skeletal remains, some still clothed in rotted fabric. Some were in chains. All of them had their skulls turned toward the corridor, as if they were watching everyone who passed by. "Colonial prison," Elena said, her voice shaking. "Or maybe before that. These people were imprisoned here and forgotten, left to die in the dark." Sarah was photographing everything, her hands shaking so badly that she wasn't sure if any of the images would be usable. "How many are there?" "Too many," Elena replied. "This is where it started. This is where the veil first weakened. So much death, so much suffering in one place. It created a wound in reality, and something came through that wound. Something ancient and hungry." The water was rising. Sarah realized it with sudden alarm. It was now above her knees and climbing steadily. "We need to go back," she said. "The water is rising too fast to be natural," Elena finished. "The entity is trying to drown us. Move!" They turned and tried to wade back the way they'd come. But the water was flowing against them now, a current that shouldn't exist in a flooded basement. Sarah's legs felt like lead, and every step was an exhausting battle against the water. The flashlights flickered, once, twice, then died completely, plunging them into absolute darkness. Sarah screamed, unable to stop herself. The darkness here was alive somehow, pressing against her skin, filling her nose and mouth. "Elena," she shouted, "where are you?" "Here, I'm right here." Elena's voice came from very close, but Sarah couldn't see her. The rope between them was the only confirmation that she wasn't alone. Then the screaming started. The terrible, endless screaming that seemed to come from inside Sarah's own head. And with it came visions, images flooding her mind faster than she could process them. She saw the colonial prison as it had been centuries ago, saw prisoners brought here in chains, accused of crimes both real and imagined, saw them locked in these cells and forgotten, saw them slowly starving, slowly going mad, slowly dying in the dark, saw their desperation, their anger, their pain seeping into the very stones around them. She saw the prison burn, saw it collapse, saw the dead buried under rubble and left to rot, saw time passing, years and decades and centuries, saw the land change hands again and again, each owner feeling the wrongness of the place, but unable to name it. She saw the workhouse built on the ruins of the prison, saw new suffering layered on top of old, the poor and desperate brought here and worked to death, their bodies disposed of in unmarked graves on the grounds. She saw the tuberculosis sanatorium, patients coughing blood, dying slowly and miserably, saw doctors experimenting with new treatments, some legitimate, others horrific, saw bodies stacked like cordwood in the basement when winter came and the ground was too frozen to dig graves. And through it all, she saw something else, a presence, a consciousness, growing stronger with each death, feeding on suffering like a plant feeds on sunlight, not creating the suffering but drawn to it, attracted by the concentration of pain and despair, settling into this place like a parasite, making it home, waiting for opportunities to feed. She saw the hospital built in 1952, saw the careful, deliberate way it was designed, saw the man behind it all, a doctor named Lawrence Garrett, who knew exactly what he was building on top of, saw him making deals, performing rituals, opening the veil wider, using his patients as experimental subjects, seeing how far he could push them before they broke. And she saw the patients, so many patients, brought here for treatment, trapped here for years, subjected to procedures that had nothing to do with healing and everything to do with feeding the entity that lived in the foundation. Electroshock therapy, insulin shock, lobotomies, isolation, all of it designed to break their minds, to create the kind of suffering the entity craved. She saw Dr. Garrett in his final years, old and sick and terrified of death, saw him perform one final ritual, attempting to transfer his consciousness into the entity itself, to become part of it and achieve immortality. Saw it partially work. His body died, but something of him remained, merged with the entity, making it more intelligent, more purposeful, more dangerous. Sarah saw all of this in seconds that felt like hours, and through it all she kept screaming. Then hands grabbed her shoulders and shook her hard. "Sarah, come back. Focus on my voice." Sarah blinked, gasped, and suddenly she was back in her own body. The water was around her waist now, still rising. Elena was in front of her, visible again, because the flashlights had somehow come back on. "I saw it," Sarah gasped. "I saw everything. The entity is not just some ancient thing. It's Dr. Garrett. The man who ran this hospital. He's still here, merged with whatever was here before." "I know," Elena said urgently. "I saw it too. The entity shows people the truth sometimes, trying to break them. But we can't think about that now. We need to survive." The current was getting stronger, pulling at them. Sarah looked back and saw that the corridor behind them was completely flooded now, the water reaching the ceiling. They couldn't go back the way they'd come. "Forward," Elena said. "It's our only choice. Maybe there's a way up ahead." They pushed through the rising water, moving as fast as they could. Sarah's arms and legs were numb, and she could feel her strength fading. How long had they been in the water? 5 minutes? 10? It felt like hours. The corridor opened into a larger chamber, and Sarah realized with horror that she recognized it from her vision. This was the ritual chamber, the place where Dr. Garrett had performed his final experiment. The water was shallower here, only ankle deep, draining away through cracks in the floor. In the center of the chamber was a stone altar, and on that altar was a book bound in what looked like human skin. "Don't touch it," Elena warned. "Don't touch anything." But Sarah was drawn to the book like a magnet. She could feel it calling to her, promising answers, promising truth, promising power. She took a step toward it, then another. "Sarah, no." Elena grabbed her arm, pulling her back. The touch broke whatever spell the book had over her. Sarah shook her head, clearing it. "Sorry, I need to see it. I need to know what it says." "It doesn't matter what it says," Elena insisted. "It's a trap, just like everything else here." But Sarah had already pulled out her camera and was taking photographs of the altar and the book. If she couldn't read it, at least she could document it. Maybe later, from the safety of the outside world, they could analyze the images. That's when the entity spoke, and they were back in the present moment, back in the pitch darkness, with the thing that used to be Dr. Lawrence Garrett speaking to them in its horrible grinding voice. "Welcome," it said again. "I've been waiting for you, both of you. The seeker of knowledge and the teller of stories. You'll make excellent additions to my collection." Light bloomed suddenly, but it wasn't from their flashlights. It came from the walls themselves, a sickly green phosphorescence that illuminated the chamber in nightmare detail. Sarah could see now that the walls were not stone at all. They were made of bodies. Hundreds of bodies, maybe thousands, compressed together and somehow preserved, their faces frozen in expressions of terror and agony. And standing in the center of the chamber, beside the altar, was Dr. Garrett, or what was left of him. He looked like a man in his 60s wearing a doctor's coat from the 1950s, with wire-rimmed glasses and thinning hair. But his edges were blurred, shifting, as if he couldn't quite hold a solid form. And behind him, visible through his semi-transparent body, was something vast and dark and utterly inhuman. "Do you like my collection?" Garrett asked, gesturing at the walls. "Every person who died here, every patient who suffered under my care, every investigator who came seeking answers, all of them are part of this place now, part of me, their experiences, their memories, their pain. All of it feeds the work." "What work?" Sarah demanded, finding her voice despite her terror. "What are you trying to do?" Garrett smiled, and it was the most disturbing thing Sarah had ever seen. His teeth were black and rotted, and when he smiled she could see through the back of his skull to the horror beyond. "To understand," he said simply. "To catalog every possible human experience, every emotion, every thought. To create a perfect map of human consciousness. That's what I started doing when I was alive, you see, using my patients to explore the limits of the human mind. But my research was cut short by death. So I found a way around death. I merged with something older and greater, and now I can continue my work forever." "You're torturing people," Elena said, her voice filled with disgust. "You're trapping souls and feeding on their suffering. That's not research. That's evil." "Evil?" Garrett laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Such a limited concept. I'm beyond good and evil now. I'm pure inquiry, pure knowledge. And soon you'll be part of that knowledge too." He moved toward them, and the dark thing behind him moved with him, flowing through the air like smoke. Sarah backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The chamber had no visible exits, and the water-filled corridor behind them was still flooding. "Elena," Sarah whispered, "what do we do?" "The book," Elena replied, equally quiet. "If Garrett's consciousness is bound to this place, there might be a way to sever that binding. The ritual book might have the key." "But you said not to touch it." "I said not to touch it, carelessly. But now we don't have a choice." Before Garrett could reach them, Elena lunged for the altar. Her hand closed around the book, and immediately everything changed. The phosphorescent light flared brighter, painful to look at. Garrett screamed, a sound of rage and pain that made Sarah's ears ring. "You can't," he shrieked. "That's mine. It's part of me." Elena flipped through the pages with shaking hands, her eyes scanning the text. Sarah could see it was written in multiple languages, some of which she recognized and others that looked like nothing human had ever written. "Here," Elena said, "the binding ritual. If we can reverse it." She started reading aloud, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. Garrett was changing now, his human form dissolving into something else. The dark thing behind him was coming forward, no longer trying to hide behind a human mask. Sarah could see its true form now, and it was worse than anything her imagination could have conjured. It was vast and formless, made of shadow and hunger and ancient malice. It had no eyes, but she could feel it seeing her. It had no mouth, but she could hear it laughing. Elena kept reading, her voice growing stronger. The words she spoke seemed to have power, seemed to push back against the darkness. Garrett thing was writhing now, parts of it coming apart and reforming, as if the ritual was pulling him in two different directions at once. "Help me," Elena shouted to Sarah. "Read with me. The words have power if we both speak them." Sarah joined in, reading from the book over Elena's shoulder. The language was strange and difficult, hurting her throat to speak, but she pushed through. Together their voices rose, filling the chamber with sound that seemed to resonate in the walls themselves. The bodies in the walls were moving now, their faces twisting, their mouths opening. And from those mouths came voices, hundreds of voices, all speaking in unison with Sarah and Elena. The trapped souls were helping them, adding their power to the ritual. Garrett screamed again, and this time it was a sound of genuine pain. The dark thing was pulling away from him, being forced back through the veil between worlds. Dr. Garrett's human consciousness was separating from the entity, and neither of them wanted to let go. "You can't do this," Garrett shrieked. "I've been here for 70 years. I am this place. You can't separate us." "Watch us," Elena said grimly, and kept reading. The chamber shook. Cracks appeared in the walls, and through those cracks, Sarah could see something else. Light. Real light. Daylight from the world above. The hospital was coming apart, the supernatural architecture that Garrett and the entity had created breaking down. With a final terrible scream, Garrett and the entity separated. Dr. Lawrence Garrett's spirit hung in the air for a moment, looking old and tired and frightened. Then he simply dissolved, like fog burning away in sunlight. Whatever had kept him bound to this world for 7 decades was gone. The entity, freed from Garrett's consciousness but also trapped by the ritual, howled with rage. It thrashed against the boundaries Elena's words had created, but it couldn't break through. Slowly, inevitably, it was pulled back through the veil, back to whatever realm it had originally come from. The bodies in the walls were dissolving too, the trapped souls finally free to move on. Sarah saw their faces change, saw terror become relief, saw suffering become peace. One by one, they faded away, until the walls were just stone again, old and cracked but no longer horrific. The book in Elena's hands crumbled to dust, its purpose fulfilled. The chamber shook one final time and then fell still. "Is it over?" Sarah asked, her voice hoarse from reading the ritual. "For now," Elena replied. She looked exhausted, her face gray with fatigue. "The entity is banished and Garrett is gone, but the veil is still broken here. We've bought time, weakened the entity's hold, but this place will always be dangerous. It needs a guardian." "I'll do it," a voice said from behind them. Sarah spun around and saw the ghost from her apartment, the woman in the nurse's uniform, but she looked different now, more solid, more real, more at peace. "I'm Margaret Chen," the woman said. "I died here in 1987. I've been trapped here ever since, watching Garrett torture and kill. But now that he's gone, now that the entity is weakened, I can choose to stay. I can be the guardian, keep watch, warn people away, make sure nothing like this happens again." "Are you sure?" Elena asked. "Being a guardian means giving up any chance of moving on, of finding peace." Margaret smiled sadly. "I found peace when I saw Garrett destroyed. Now I need purpose. Let me do this. Let me protect others from what happened to me." Sarah felt tears running down her face. "Thank you," she said. "Thank you for warning me. Thank you for helping." "Write the story," Margaret said. "Tell the world what happened here. Make sure people understand the danger. That's all I ask." Elena nodded. We will. I promise." The chamber shook again, and suddenly there was a doorway where none had existed before. Through it, Sarah could see stairs, leading up toward daylight. "Go," Margaret said. "Quickly, before the building collapses. It won't survive what we just did." Sarah and Elena ran for the stairs, their equipment forgotten in their desperate need to escape. They climbed up and up, past the basement level, past the first floor, until they burst out through the main entrance into glorious, wonderful, normal daylight. Behind them, the Blackwood Psychiatric Hospital was collapsing. Not dramatically, not explosively, but slowly and inevitably. Walls crumbled. The roof sagged. Windows shattered. Within minutes, there was nothing left but rubble and dust. Sarah and Elena stood in the parking lot, watching it fall, their arms around each other for support. They were soaked, freezing, exhausted, and traumatized. But they were alive. "Did we really just do that?" Sarah asked, not quite believing it. "We really just did that?" Elena confirmed. She checked her watch and laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. 3:05, we're 5 minutes late." Sarah laughed too, and once she started, she couldn't stop. It was the laughter of relief, of survival, of having faced something terrible and come out the other side. They sat in Elena's car for a long time, just breathing, just being alive. Eventually, Elena called Dr. Park and told him they were safe. Sarah called her editor and told him she wouldn't be in the office for a few days. Neither of them told the truth about where they'd been or what they'd done. How could they? Who would believe them? As Elena drove them back to the city, Sarah pulled out her camera and checked the footage. To her amazement, it had recorded. Not everything. There were gaps and glitches, especially during the worst moments. But enough. Enough to show the ritual chamber, the bodies in the walls, the book, and yes, even brief glimpses of Garrett and the entity. "We have evidence," she said, wonder in her voice. "Real, actual evidence." "Then we use it," Elena replied. "We write the story. We publish the research. We warn everyone we can about places like this." "But carefully," Sarah added. "We have to be smart about how we present this. If we sound too crazy, no one will listen." "Agreed. We'll frame it as an investigation into urban legends and historical atrocities. We'll let the evidence speak for itself. People can draw their own conclusions." They drove in silence for a while, both of them processing what had happened. Finally, Sarah spoke again. "Elena." Back in the chamber, when Garrett was talking about his collection, he said we'd make excellent additions. Plural. He knew about both of us. "How?" Elena's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "I've been thinking about that too. Someone must have told him we were coming, someone who knew our plans. But the only people who knew were you, me, and Dr. Park." "Yes," Elena said quietly. "And I trust James Park with my life, which means someone else knows," Sarah finished. "Someone who's been watching us, following our research." "The person who sent you the book of locations," Elena said, "and the warning messages. They're not just helping us, they're guiding us, directing us to specific places for specific reasons." "But why?" Sarah demanded. "What do they want?" "I don't know," Elena admitted, "but I think we need to find out. Because if someone is manipulating us, leading us from one dangerous location to another, We need to know why, and we need to know what they expect to happen when we get to the end of their list. Sarah thought about the book, about the 37 locations it contained. They dealt with room 13 and the Blackwood Hospital. That left 35 more. 35 more places where the veil was thin, where entities waited, where people were in danger. We can't investigate them all, she said. Even if we wanted to, we don't have the resources or the time. No, Elena agreed, but we can prioritize. We can focus on the most dangerous ones, the places where people are actively being harmed, and we can share our research with others, build a network of investigators who can help us cover more ground. It was a plan, rough and incomplete, but it was something. Sarah felt a strange sense of purpose settling over her. This was her life now, not writing about garden shows or local politics, but investigating the hidden world, documenting the truth that most people never saw, warning others away from danger. Robert Chen was right, she said softly. This work consumes you. It becomes everything. Yes, Elena said, but it's necessary work. Someone has to do it. Then I guess we're the someones, Sarah replied. They reached the city as evening fell, the street lights flickering on one by one. Sarah's apartment building looked exactly the same as when she'd left it that morning, but she felt like she'd been gone for years. She felt fundamentally changed by what she'd experienced, by what she'd seen and done. Get some rest, Elena said as Sarah got out of the car. We'll start analyzing the footage and writing up our findings tomorrow, but tonight, just rest. Sarah nodded and headed inside. Her apartment was quiet and normal and safe, and she'd never been more grateful for normalcy in her life. She took a long, hot shower, washing away the cold and the dirt and the memory of that terrible water rising around her. When she finally got out, wrapped in her bathrobe and towel drying her hair, she found a new message on her phone, from an unknown number as always. Congratulations on surviving the Blackwood Hospital. You did well, but your work is far from over. There are 35 locations remaining, and some are far more dangerous than what you just faced. I'll be in touch soon with instructions for your next investigation. Stay safe. A friend. Sarah stared at the message, anger rising in her chest. Instructions? As if she was just some puppet dancing on someone else's strings. She typed back, "Who are you? Why are you doing this? If you have information about these places, why not investigate them yourself?" The response came almost immediately. All will be explained in time. For now, you need to focus on recovery and documentation, but know this, you were chosen for a reason. You have a role to play in something much larger than you realize. The thin places are part of a pattern, a network, a plan that has been in motion for centuries, and you're going to help expose it. I don't work for you, Sarah typed furiously. I make my own choices. Of course you do, came the reply. I'm not forcing you to do anything. I'm simply providing information and encouragement. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. But I think you'll investigate the other locations because you can't help yourself, because you've seen the truth, and now you need to understand all of it. Good night, Sarah Mitchell. Sleep well. You'll need your strength for what comes next. The conversation ended there. Sarah threw her phone on the bed in frustration, but she knew the mysterious sender was right. She would investigate the other locations. Not because someone was telling her to, but because she had to. Because people were suffering, and she had the means to help them. She climbed into bed exhausted, but knowing sleep would be difficult. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the bodies in the walls, saw Dr. Garrett's rotting smile, saw the dark thing that he'd merged with. She saw Margaret Chen choosing to become a guardian, sacrificing her chance at peace to protect others. And she thought about Robert Chen, standing watch in room 13. Were there others like him, scattered across the world? Other guardians holding the line against things that wanted to break through. How many people were making that sacrifice, unknown and unrecognized, keeping the world safe from horrors most people didn't even know existed? Eventually, Sarah did sleep, though her dreams were troubled and strange. She dreamed of ancient prisons and hospitals and houses. She dreamed of thin places scattered across a map like infected wounds. She dreamed of a vast web connecting them all, and at the center of that web, something watching, waiting, planning. When she woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through her window. For a moment, just a moment, everything felt normal. Then she remembered, and the weight of everything she'd learned came crashing back down. Her phone buzzed with messages, one from Elena. "Coffee at my office at 10? We have a lot to discuss." Another from her editor, Tom. "Heard you were investigating something big, anything publishable?" And one more from the unknown number. Room 13 and Blackwood were just the beginning. The next location is more dangerous than both combined. But it's also the key to understanding the whole pattern. Are you ready? Sarah looked at the 3 messages, representing 3 different paths her life could take. She could work with Elena, take things slow and methodical, building a case carefully. She could focus on writing publishable stories, staying within the bounds of what mainstream journalism would accept. Or she could dive deeper, follow the mysterious guide's instructions, risk everything to uncover the full truth. In the end, it wasn't really a choice at all. She was a journalist, a truth seeker, an investigator. She'd seen behind the curtain, and there was no going back. She typed a response to the unknown number. "Tell me about the next location." The reply came within seconds. The Hargrove Estate, built in 1823, located in rural Maine. 7 people have died there in the last 50 years, but those are just the official deaths. The unofficial count is much, much higher. The entity there is different from what you've faced before. It doesn't trap souls. It collects them, trades them, sells them to other entities across the Vale. It's a trafficker in human consciousness, and it's been operating for 200 years. Your mission, should you choose to accept it, is to expose it and shut it down. But be warned, this entity has resources, connections, and it doesn't fight fair. You'll need help. More help than just Dr. Vasquez can provide. Sarah read the message twice, her heart pounding. A trafficker in human souls? It sounded impossible, insane. But then again, so had everything else she'd encountered, and it had all turned out to be real. "What kind of help?" she typed back. "I'm sending you contact information for 3 people. Each of them has skills you'll need. Each of them has been touched by the supernatural and survived. They don't know each other yet, but they will. You're going to build a team, Sarah Mitchell. You're going to become more than just a journalist documenting these horrors. You're going to become someone who fights them, someone who makes a difference." 3 names appeared on her screen, each with a phone number and a brief description. Marcus Reed, former police detective, investigated a series of disappearances connected to the Hargrove estate, was dismissed from the force when he tried to report supernatural elements, has personal reasons for wanting the estate's entity destroyed. Yuki Tanaka, paranormal researcher and technology specialist, developed equipment for detecting and recording supernatural phenomena, lost her sister to an entity similar to the one at Hargrove. Father Thomas O'Brien, Catholic priest with training in exorcism and spiritual warfare, has been studying and fighting against malevolent entities for 30 years, recently retired from active duty but willing to consult on extreme cases. Sarah stared at the names, feeling the weight of the decision before her. If she called these people, if she brought them together, she'd be taking a step that couldn't be undone. She'd be forming an organization dedicated to fighting supernatural threats. She'd be committing to this path completely. But really, hadn't she already made that commitment? The moment she walked into room 13, the moment she descended into the Blackwood Hospital's basement, she'd crossed a line. There was no going back to her old life, her old career, her old understanding of the world. She took a deep breath and started making calls. The first person she called was Elena because Elena deserved to know what was happening and to make her own choice about involvement. "You're really going to do this?" Elena asked after Sarah explained everything. "You're going to form a team and actively hunt these entities?" "I have to," Sarah said. "You said it yourself. There aren't enough guardians. There are too many thin places. If we don't do something, more people will die. More souls will be trapped. I can't just document it and walk away anymore." Elena was quiet for a long moment, then, "I'm in. I'm not young, and I'm not sure how much I can contribute physically, but my knowledge and research can help, and someone needs to make sure you don't get yourself killed." Sarah felt a wave of relief. "Thank you, that means everything." The second call was to Marcus Reed. A gruff voice answered after 3 rings. "Yeah?" "Mr. Reed? My name is Sarah Mitchell. I'm a journalist investigating—" "Let me stop you right there," Reed interrupted. "I don't talk to journalists. I don't talk to anyone about what happened. Leave me alone. Please, just listen for a moment. I'm investigating the Hargrove estate. I know about the disappearances. I know what you saw. And I believe you." A long pause. Then, "Say that again." "I believe you. I've seen things like what you saw. I've encountered entities. I'm putting together a team to investigate the estate and try to stop what's happening there. I need someone with your skills and your knowledge." Another pause, even longer this time. Sarah held her breath, waiting. "The Hargrove estate destroyed my life," Reed said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "I lost my job, my reputation, my marriage, all because I told the truth about what I saw there. Why should I go back? Why should I risk what little I have left?" "Because people are still dying," Sarah said quietly. "Because the entity is still operating, still trading in human souls, and because you know the truth, and you can't unknow it. You can either let it destroy you, or you can use what you know to fight back." She heard him breathing on the other end of the line. Then, "When do you want to meet?" The third call was to Yuki Tanaka. This one was answered on the first ring by a woman with a sharp, precise voice. "Tanaka Paranormal Research. How can I help you?" Sarah explained her situation and the planned investigation. There was a long silence when she finished. "The Hargrove estate," Yuki said finally. "That's where my sister disappeared 12 years ago. The police said she ran away. Her friends said she just left one day without telling anyone. But I knew. I knew something took her. I've been developing equipment ever since, trying to find proof, trying to understand." "And you're saying you can Get me inside that estate? Yes. But it will be dangerous. The entity there is powerful and has been operating for a long time. We might not all come out. I don't care, Yuki said, and Sarah could hear the steel in her voice. I've been waiting 12 years for this chance. I'm in. The fourth call to Father O'Brien was the longest. The priest listened carefully to everything Sarah told him, asking occasional questions, his voice thoughtful and measured. You've been busy, Ms. Mitchell, he said when she finished. Room 13 in the Blackwood Hospital in the span of a few months. Most people don't encounter one thin place in their entire lives. I'm being guided, Sarah admitted. Someone is sending me locations, pushing me toward these investigations. I don't know who or why, but I think it's part of something larger. I agree, Father O'Brien said, and I think I might know who's guiding you, though I won't say until I'm certain. But yes, I'll help. The Hargrove estate has been on the church's radar for years. We've tried several times to investigate it officially, but we've always been blocked by the local authorities. If you can get inside, if you can document what's happening there, it might finally give us the evidence we need to take action. By the time Sarah finished all her calls, it was early afternoon. She felt exhausted, but also energized. She was doing something. She was taking action. For the first time since this all began, she felt like she had some control over events, instead of just reacting to them. She met with Elena that evening to watch the footage from the Blackwood Hospital. It was disturbing even in the safety of Elena's office, seeing the bodies in the walls, seeing Garrett's transformation, seeing the entity in all its terrible glory. This is incredible documentation, Elena said, and terrifying. The world needs to see this, needs to understand what's out there. But how do we release it without looking insane? Sarah asked. How do we convince people this is real? Carefully, Elena replied. We start with the history, the documented deaths, the atrocities committed by Dr. Garrett when he was alive. That's all verifiable, all matters of public record. Then we show the footage of the building collapsing, which can be explained as a natural structural failure. And then only then do we show the supernatural elements. We present it as, here's what we saw, here's our documentation, draw your own conclusions. They spent hours editing the footage, creating a presentation that was comprehensive but not sensationalist. Sarah wrote an accompanying article that detailed the investigation from start to finish, including her own skepticism and fear, making it personal and human rather than a dry recitation of facts. When they finished, it was past midnight. Sarah's eyes were burning from staring at screens, and her brain felt like mush. But it was done. They had a document that was both truthful and hopefully credible. Now what? Sarah asked. Now we sleep, Elena said. Tomorrow we start organizing the Hargrove investigation. We bring the team together, we plan our approach, and we prepare for what might be the most dangerous investigation any of us have ever undertaken. Sarah went home and collapsed into bed, this time falling asleep immediately. She dreamed of the Hargrove estate, though she'd never seen it. In her dream, it was a massive Victorian mansion with towers and turrets, sitting on a hill surrounded by dead trees. And in one of the upper windows, she saw a figure watching her, waiting for her. She woke with a start to find sunlight streaming through her window again. Her phone showed several missed calls and messages. One was from Marcus Reed. Been thinking about your proposal. I want in, but I have conditions. Let's meet to discuss. One was from Yuki Tanaka. I've been reviewing my equipment. I think I've developed something that might be able to disrupt entity manifestations, bringing it to our first meeting. One was from Father O'Brien. I've consulted with my superiors. The church is interested in your investigation but cannot officially support it. However, I'm retired, and what I do on my own time is my business. Count me in. And one more from the unknown number. Your team is coming together nicely. Well done. You have 2 weeks to prepare before you must go to Hargrove. After that, the window of opportunity closes, and the entity will be too strong to fight. Use your time wisely, and remember, at Hargrove, the entity doesn't just kill. It corrupts. It offers deals. It will try to turn your team against each other. Trust will be your greatest weapon and your greatest vulnerability. 2 weeks. Sarah had 2 weeks to bring together a team of strangers, prepare for an investigation into one of the most dangerous entities she'd encountered yet, and somehow keep everyone alive and sane through the process. It should have been impossible. But then again, so was everything else she'd done lately. She got out of bed, made coffee, and opened her laptop. Time to start planning. Time to learn everything possible about the Hargrove estate and the entity that lived there. Time to prepare for a battle that would test everything she'd learned and everything she believed about herself. Because Sarah Mitchell had gone from being a journalist seeking a story to being a hunter of supernatural threats. And whether she was ready or not, the next hunt was about to begin. The story was far from over. In fact, Sarah was beginning to realize it had only just begun. Sarah couldn't believe what she was seeing on her laptop screen, her hands shaking so badly that she nearly dropped the computer. The surveillance footage from the Hargrove estate was clear and unmistakable, showing one of her team members walking calmly through the front door at 3 a.m, 2 days before their planned investigation. Walking in alone, without telling anyone, without backup. Walking in as if they'd been invited, as if they'd been expected. "No," Sarah whispered to her empty hotel room, rewinding the footage to watch it again. No. This can't be happening. But it was happening. Someone on her team had made a deal with the entity. Someone had betrayed them all. And now, as she sat in this cheap hotel room 30 miles from the Hargrove estate with the investigation scheduled to begin in less than 8 hours, Sarah had to figure out who the traitor was before they all walked into a trap that would destroy them. 2 weeks earlier, Sarah had brought her team together for the first time in a conference room she'd rented at a local library. It was neutral ground, public enough to be safe, but private enough for them to speak freely. Marcus Reed arrived first. He was exactly what Sarah had expected from their phone conversation. A man in his late 40s with the weathered look of someone who'd seen too much and slept too little. He was tall and broad-shouldered with gray, streaking his dark hair and sharp blue eyes that constantly scanned the room as if looking for threats. He wore jeans and a leather jacket, and Sarah noticed he walked with a slight limp. "Car accident," he said, catching her looking. 3 years ago, not long after I was kicked off the force. Funny how these things happen just when you start making noise about the wrong topics. "You think it wasn't an accident?" Sarah asked. "I think there are people who benefit from keeping places like Hargrove secret," Reed replied. "And I think those people have resources and aren't afraid to use them." Yuki Tanaka arrived next, and she was nothing like Sarah had imagined. She'd pictured someone older, maybe severe and academic. Instead, Yuki was in her early 30s, petite and energetic, with bright pink highlights in her black hair and a Rolling Stones t-shirt under a lab coat covered in band patches. She carried 3 large equipment cases that looked heavier than she was. "Sorry I'm late," Yuki said, dumping the cases on the table with a heavy thud. "Had to recalibrate the EMF sensors. The new version can detect fluctuations at the quantum level, which should give us advance warning if the entity tries to manifest." "You built all this yourself?" Sarah asked, impressed. "Built, modified, and improved," Yuki confirmed. "Commercial paranormal equipment is mostly garbage, so I make my own. I have degrees in electrical engineering and physics, which helps. Also, I watch a lot of YouTube videos." Father O'Brien was the last to arrive, and he was exactly what Sarah had pictured. A man in his 70s with white hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and the calm demeanor of someone who'd spent decades counseling troubled souls. He wore his priest's collar and carried a worn leather bag that Sarah suspected contained religious items for spiritual warfare. "Apologies for my tardiness," he said in a soft Irish accent. "Traffic was heavier than expected." Elena Vasquez had also come, completing their group of 5. She'd brought stacks of research materials about the Hargrove estate, spreading them across the table as everyone settled in. "Before we begin," Sarah said, standing at the head of the table, "I want to make something clear. No one here is obligated to participate in this investigation. What we're planning is dangerous, possibly fatal. The Hargrove estate has killed before, and it will try to kill us. If anyone wants to walk away, now is the time. No judgment, no questions asked." She waited, watching each face carefully. No one moved. "All right then," Sarah continued. "Let's talk about what we're facing." Elena stood and pulled up a map on her laptop, projecting it onto the wall. The Hargrove estate was built in 1823 by Nathaniel Hargrove, a wealthy merchant who made his fortune in the shipping trade. The house is a 3-story Victorian mansion with 26 rooms, situated on 200 acres of isolated woodland in rural Maine. Nathaniel lived there with his wife Catherine and their 3 children until 1847, when the entire family disappeared under mysterious circumstances. "Disappeared?" Marcus asked. "No bodies found?" "None. The house was discovered empty one morning by servants. All personal belongings were still there. Breakfast was laid out on the table, but the family was gone. The official explanation at the time was that they'd been kidnapped by bandits, but there was no ransom demand, no signs of struggle, and no evidence anyone else had been in the house." Elena clicked to the next slide, showing a series of newspaper clippings. Over the next century and a half, the estate changed hands 17 times. That's an unusually high turnover rate for a property of this value. And every owner reported strange occurrences: voices in empty rooms, objects moving on their own, feelings of being watched. 7 owners died in the house under circumstances that were ruled natural causes, but were considered suspicious by investigators. "What kind of suspicious circumstances?" Yuki asked, making notes. "Heart attacks in healthy individuals. Suicides with no warning signs. One woman walked into the woods behind the house in the middle of winter wearing only a nightgown and was found frozen to death 3 days later. She'd walked in circles for miles, her footprints showing she'd passed the house multiple times, but never tried to return to it." Sarah felt a chill. The entity was controlling her, making her walk until she died. "That's my theory," Elena confirmed. But it gets worse. According to local records, at least 34 people have disappeared in the vicinity of the Hargrove estate over the last 200 years. Hikers, hunters, even a few investigators like us. The local police have written most of them off as people who got lost in the woods or chose to vanish. But the pattern is clear once you know to look for it. Marcus leaned forward. I investigated 3 disappearances connected to Hargrove between 2018 and 2020. All 3 were young women, college-aged, who went to the estate on dares or as part of urban exploration groups. Their friends reported them missing when they didn't return. We searched the house top to bottom, brought in cadaver dogs, checked every inch of the property, found nothing. No bodies, no evidence, no trace. But you saw something, Sarah said. That's why you were dismissed from the force. Marcus's jaw tightened. On the 3rd investigation, I was in the house alone, checking the attic. I heard someone crying, a woman's voice calling for help. Please? And I followed the sound to a room at the far end of the attic. When I opened the door, he paused and Sarah could see he was reliving the memory. There were people in there, dozens of them, maybe more. Just standing there, motionless, staring at nothing. I recognized 2 of them as the missing women. I tried to approach them to get them out, but then the door slammed shut. When I finally got it open again, the room was empty, just dust and old furniture. What did you do? Yuki asked. I reported what I saw. Big mistake. My captain said I was having a stress-induced hallucination, ordered me to take a psych evaluation. When I refused and kept pushing to investigate further, I was suspended pending a fitness review. Eventually, I was given a choice. Retire quietly with full pension or be fired for mental instability. I took the retirement, but everyone knows why I really left. Father O'Brien nodded sympathetically. I've heard similar stories from others who've encountered these entities. They have ways of making witnesses seem unreliable, of ensuring the truth is dismissed as madness. So what exactly are we dealing with? Sarah asked. What kind of entity collects people like this? Elena pulled up another document. Based on my research and accounts from the few people who've survived encounters at Hargrove, I believe we're dealing with what's known as a collector. It's a type of entity that doesn't feed on fear or pain like most malevolent spirits. Instead, it collects human consciousness. Think of it as a supernatural trafficker. It lures people to the estate, traps their souls, and then trades them to other entities across the veil. Trades them for what? Yuki asked. Power, knowledge, favors. The supernatural world has its own economy, and human souls are valuable currency. The collector at Hargrove has been in business for 2 centuries, building up a network of contacts and clients. It's essentially running a supernatural trafficking operation. That's monstrous, Sarah breathed. Yes, Father O'Brien agreed. Which is why the church has been trying to shut it down for decades. But the entity is clever. It's established connections with influential people who benefit from its services. Local politicians, wealthy collectors, even some religious figures. It's protected. Marcus slammed his hand on the table. So what's our play? How do we take down something that's this entrenched and this powerful? We expose it, Sarah said. We document everything, gather undeniable evidence, and make it public. And we free the trapped souls if we can. That's the easy part, Elena said sarcastically. The hard part is surviving long enough to do it. The collector doesn't just trap people. It corrupts them. It offers them deals, power, wealth, knowledge, anything they desire in exchange for service. Some of the people who've gone to Hargrove weren't victims. They were customers. They went there willingly to make bargains. And some of them became agents, Father O'Brien added. Humans who work for the entity, luring others to the estate, protecting its interests in the outside world. We have to assume that some of these agents know we're planning an investigation, which means we need to be very careful about who we trust and what information we share publicly, Sarah said. She looked around the table at her team. From this moment forward, we operate under the assumption that we're being watched and that someone will try to stop us. We keep our plans private, we watch each other's backs, and we don't tell anyone outside this room what we're doing. Everyone nodded in agreement. They spent the next several hours planning their approach, reviewing the layout of the estate, and discussing what equipment they'd need. Yuki described her various gadgets and sensors. Marcus walked them through basic tactical procedures for entering and clearing a potentially dangerous building. Father O'Brien explained the rituals and protections they could use to defend themselves against supernatural attack. Elena provided historical context and analysis of the entity's likely behavior patterns. By the time they finished, night had fallen outside the library windows. They had a plan, or at least the skeleton of one. They would enter the estate in 2 weeks, on the night of the new moon when supernatural activity was traditionally at its peak. They would document everything, search for the trapped souls, and attempt to disrupt the collector's operations. It was ambitious. It was dangerous. And Sarah suspected not all of them would survive it. Over the following days, the team met several more times to refine their plan and practice working together. Sarah was impressed by how quickly they gelled as a unit, despite their different backgrounds and personalities. Marcus was the tactical expert, always thinking 3 steps ahead about escape routes and defensive positions. Yuki was the tech wizard, constantly tinkering with her equipment and coming up with new ways to detect and record supernatural phenomena. Father O'Brien was their spiritual advisor, providing both practical knowledge about fighting entities and emotional support for the team. Elena was their researcher, able to find obscure historical details and make connections that others missed. And Sarah? She was the coordinator, the storyteller, the one who kept everyone focused on their ultimate goal, exposing the truth and helping the victims. But as the days passed, Sarah became increasingly aware that someone was watching them. She'd catch glimpses of the same car parked outside her apartment building multiple times. Her phone would occasionally make strange clicking noises during calls, and once she came home to find her apartment door unlocked. Though nothing appeared to be missing, she mentioned it to Marcus, who took it seriously. "We're definitely under surveillance," he confirmed. "I've noticed it too. Someone's keeping tabs on all of us." "The entity's agents?" Sarah asked. "Probably. Or whoever's pulling the strings behind the scenes." Marcus paused, then added, "There's something else you should know. I've been doing some digging into the current ownership of the Hargrove estate. It's buried under layers of shell companies and trusts, but I finally traced it back to the ultimate owner." "Who?" "A man named Vincent Hargrove, Nathaniel Hargrove's great-great-great-grandson. The family never actually lost control of the property. They've been maintaining it all this time through different front organizations, but it's always stayed in Hargrove hands." Sarah felt her blood run cold. "So the family knows about the entity. They've been protecting it for 200 years. "It's worse than that," Marcus said grimly. I found records of Vincent Hargrove attending charity events, serving on boards of directors, making political donations. He's wealthy, connected, and respected in society. If we try to expose what's happening at the estate, he'll use all his resources to discredit us. Then we make sure our evidence is absolutely ironclad, Sarah said. We document everything so thoroughly that he can't deny it. But privately, she was worried. They weren't just fighting a supernatural entity. They were fighting a wealthy, powerful family with 2 centuries of practice at keeping secrets. 3 days before the planned investigation, Sarah received another message from her mysterious guide. Be careful. The collector knows you're coming. It's preparing a welcome for you. One of your team members has been compromised. Watch for signs of betrayal. Trust no one completely. Sarah read the message multiple times, feeling paranoia creeping in. One of her team members was compromised. But which one? She'd worked closely with all of them, and they all seemed genuinely committed to the investigation. She called an emergency meeting and shared the warning, watching everyone's reactions carefully. Marcus looked angry. Yuki looked shocked. Father O'Brien looked troubled. Elena looked thoughtful. If there's a traitor among us, we need to identify them before we go to Hargrove, Marcus said bluntly. Otherwise, we're walking into a death trap. But how? Yuki asked. How do we know who's been compromised? The entity could have gotten to any of us. We watch each other, Sarah said. We work in pairs, never alone, and we look for any unusual behavior or attempts to sabotage our preparations. It was an uncomfortable decision, turning them against each other with suspicion. But Sarah didn't see any alternative. The warning had been clear. One of them was working for the entity, whether willingly or through manipulation. Over the next 2 days, Sarah observed her team carefully. Marcus seemed normal, focused on logistics and security. Yuki was her usual energetic self, making last-minute modifications to her equipment. Father O'Brien spent hours in prayer and preparation, creating blessed items for their protection. Elena continued her research, finding more historical details about the Hargrove family and their connection to the estate. Nothing seemed obviously wrong, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, that she was missing something important. Then, the night before they were scheduled to leave for Maine, Sarah got a call from a local contact she'd cultivated, a woman named Jennifer who worked in property records. Jennifer had been helping Sarah research the Hargrove estate's ownership history. Sarah, I found something, Jennifer said, her voice urgent. You asked me to look into any recent activity related to the Hargrove property. There was a visitor to the estate 2 nights ago. The security system logged someone entering the property at 3:17 a.m. Who? Sarah demanded. I don't know. The system doesn't record names, just timestamps. But Sarah, the access code used to disable the alarm, it was registered to one of your team members. I can't tell you who without violating privacy laws, but I can tell you this. Whoever went to that estate did so with authorized access. They were invited in. Sarah felt sick. Can you at least tell me if it was a man or a woman? Jennifer hesitated. The system doesn't... Look, I could lose my job for even telling you this much, but I think you're doing important work, and I think you're in danger. All I can say is be very careful who you trust. And Sarah, don't go to that estate tomorrow, please. Whatever you're planning, it's not worth dying for. Sarah thanked Jennifer and ended the call. Her mind was racing. Someone on her team had gone to the Hargrove estate 2 nights ago. Someone had access codes, which meant they'd been communicating with Vincent Hargrove or his representatives. Someone was working for the enemy. She wanted to call an emergency meeting to confront the team and demand answers. But what if that just tipped off the traitor? What if they panicked and did something desperate? Instead, Sarah spent the night reviewing everything she knew about each team member, looking for any clue, any inconsistency. She went through their backgrounds, their motivations for joining the investigation, their behaviors over the past 2 weeks. Marcus Reed, former cop with a personal grudge against the estate, had lost his career trying to expose it. But could that anger have been manipulated? Could the entity have offered him something he wanted badly enough to betray the team? Yuki Tanaka lost her sister to the estate 12 years ago. Genuinely seemed driven by grief and a desire for answers. But grief could be a powerful tool for manipulation. Could the entity have offered her sister back in exchange for cooperation? Father O'Brien, decades of experience fighting entities, officially retired but still active, had resources and knowledge that none of the rest of them possessed. But could those resources have come at a price? Could he have made deals with entities in the past that he was now obligated to honor? Elena Vasquez, Sarah's mentor and friend, the one who'd introduced her to this world, the one who'd been studying these phenomena for 30 years, the one who knew more about thin places and entities than anyone else Sarah had met. Could that knowledge have come from working with entities rather than just studying them? Sarah didn't want to suspect any of them, but she had to consider every possibility. By morning, she was exhausted and no closer to identifying the traitor. The team met at a hotel near the Maine border, planning to drive to the Hargrove estate together. Sarah had arranged for them to stay in a small hotel 30 miles from the estate, close enough to reach quickly, but far enough to maintain some safety. As they gathered in the hotel lobby, Sarah studied each face carefully. Who among them had betrayed the team? Who had gone to the estate 2 nights ago and made a deal with the devil? "Everyone ready?" Marcus asked, checking his equipment bag. They all nodded. Sarah felt like she was about to lead lambs to slaughter, but she couldn't back out now. Too much was at stake. Too many people were trapped at that estate waiting for rescue. They loaded into 2 vehicles, Marcus's truck and Elena's car. Sarah rode with Marcus and Yuki, while Elena drove Father O'Brien. The drive took about 40 minutes, taking them through increasingly rural areas until they were surrounded by dense forest. The Hargrove estate appeared suddenly around a curve, looming above them on a hill. It was even more impressive and intimidating than the photos had suggested. The mansion was massive, 3 stories of Victorian architecture with towers and turrets, surrounded by dead trees and overgrown gardens. Even in daylight, it looked wrong somehow, as if it existed slightly out of phase with the normal world. They parked at the base of the hill and gathered their equipment. Sarah checked her camera, making sure it was recording. This was it. This was the moment they'd been preparing for. "Remember the plan," Marcus said. "We stick together, we watch each other's backs, and if anyone feels like something's wrong, we speak up immediately. No heroics, no splitting up. We're a team." They approached the front door, which stood slightly ajar. Sarah's skin was crawling with unease. Everything about this felt like a trap. Marcus pushed the door open and they entered the Hargrove estate. The interior was surprisingly well maintained for an abandoned house. The furniture was covered in dust sheets, but the structure itself seemed solid. The entrance hall was grand, with a sweeping staircase leading to the upper floors and doorways leading to various rooms on the ground level. "Yuki, what are your sensors reading?" Sarah asked. Yuki checked her equipment, frowning. "EMF levels are off the charts. There's definitely a massive supernatural presence here. But it's strange. The readings are coming from below us, not from the house itself." "Below?" Elena said sharply. "You mean there's a basement?" "Must be," Yuki confirmed. "And whatever's down there is powerful. I've never seen readings like this." Marcus found a door that led to a staircase heading down. The stairs were old wooden things that creaked ominously under their weight. As they descended, the temperature dropped noticeably, and Sarah could see her breath misting in the air. The basement was vast, much larger than the footprint of the house above it. Stone walls stretched in multiple directions, forming a labyrinth of corridors and rooms. It reminded Sarah uncomfortably of the basement at the Blackwood hospital. "This is old," Father O'Brien said, examining the stonework. "Older than the house. This structure predates the 1823 construction by at least a century, possibly more." "So Nathaniel Hargrove built his house on top of something that was already here," Sarah said, "just like the Blackwood hospital." "It's a pattern," Elena confirmed. "These entities seek out places where the veil is already thin, where terrible things have already happened. Then they make it worse." They moved deeper into the basement complex, Yuki's sensors guiding them toward the strongest source of supernatural energy. The corridors twisted and turned in ways that shouldn't be possible given the geography above. It was disorienting, and Sarah found herself relying on Marcus's sense of direction to keep them from getting lost. Finally, they entered a large chamber that made Sarah's breath catch. The room was filled with cells, dozens of them, maybe hundreds, stretching back into shadows that their flashlights couldn't penetrate. And in each cell, Sarah could see a figure, motionless, silent, staring at nothing. "The collected souls," Father O'Brien whispered. "Dear God, there are so many of them." Marcus moved closer to one of the cells, shining his flashlight on the figure inside. It was a young woman, maybe 20 years old, wearing modern clothes. She didn't react to the light, didn't blink, didn't move at all. "She's still alive," Marcus said, checking for a pulse. "Her heart's beating, she's breathing, but she's not here. It's like her consciousness has been removed." "That's exactly what's happened," a new voice said from behind them. They spun around to find a man standing in the entrance to the chamber. He was in his 50s, well dressed in an expensive suit, with silver hair and cold eyes. Vincent Hargrove. Sarah recognized him from her research. But he wasn't alone. Standing beside him, looking sheepish and guilty and defiant all at once, was one of their team members. Sarah's heart sank as she saw who the traitor was. She'd suspected, but seeing the confirmation was still like a physical blow. "I'm sorry," the traitor said. "I didn't have a choice." "There's always a choice," Marcus said coldly, his hand moving toward the gun Sarah knew he carried. "Don't," Vincent said calmly. "You're surrounded and outmatched. I have a dozen associates in the corridors behind you. If you try to fight, you'll lose. But I'm not interested in violence. I'm interested in making a deal." "We're not making deals with you," Sarah spat. "You're a monster. You've been trafficking in human souls for 2 centuries. "I'm a businessman," Vincent corrected. "I provide a service that certain clients are willing to pay extremely well for, The souls I collect would have died eventually anyway. At least this way, they serve a purpose." "You're insane," Yuki said, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the traitor. "How could you? How could you betray us like this?" "Because he offered me something I couldn't refuse," the traitor replied. "Something more valuable than your friendship or your trust. He offered me the truth. About everything, about the network of thin places, about the entities, about what's really happening in this world. And all I had to do was bring you here." "Bring us here to die," Elena said bitterly. "Not necessarily," Vincent said. "That's what I want to discuss. Ms. Mitchell, you've been causing quite a stir with your investigations. Room 13, the Blackwood Hospital, and now here. You're exposing things that were meant to stay hidden, things that powerful people have worked very hard to keep secret." "Good," Sarah said. "The world deserves to know the truth." "Does it?" Vincent asked. "What do you think would happen if you published everything you know? If you showed the world proof that supernatural entities exist, that souls can be trapped and traded, that the veil between worlds is thin and breaking? You'd cause mass panic. Society would collapse. Wars would be fought over control of these thin places. The entities would be provoked into open warfare with humanity. Is that what you want?" Sarah hesitated because she'd thought about this. She'd worried about the consequences of exposure. But she'd also seen the victims, the trapped souls, the people suffering because these secrets were being kept. "The alternative is letting monsters like you continue operating," she said. "Letting innocent people be trafficked and tortured and destroyed. That's not acceptable either." "So you're at an impasse," Vincent said, "which is why I'm proposing a compromise. You want to free these souls? Fine, I'll release them, every single one of them. I'll even shut down my operation here at the Hargrove estate permanently. But in exchange, you stop your investigations. You destroy all your evidence. You go back to writing about garden shows and charity bake sales. You leave the supernatural world alone." Sarah stared at him, trying to process the offer. He'd release all the trapped souls? Hundreds of people who'd been imprisoned here, some for decades? That was what she wanted? That was the goal? But stop investigating? Stop exposing the truth? Go back to pretending none of this existed? "Don't do it," Marcus said urgently. "He's lying. Even if he releases these souls, he'll just set up shop somewhere else. The only way to stop this is to destroy him and expose everything." "But the souls," Yuki said, "we can't leave them here. My sister might be one of them." "Your sister's one of them," Vincent confirmed. "Cell 47, third row back. I'll make you a special offer, Miss Tanaka. You can have your sister back right now today if you walk away from this investigation. Just turn around and leave, and I'll wake her up and send her home to your family. Don't you want that? Don't you want to see her again?" Yuki was crying openly now, torn between her desire to save her sister and her loyalty to the team. Sarah understood the temptation. If someone had offered to bring back a loved one, would she be able to resist? "It's a trick," Father O'Brien said firmly. "The souls he's collected have been here too long. Even if he releases them, they may not be the same people they were. The entity has had time to corrupt them, to change them." "The entity is me," Vincent said, and suddenly his form flickered, just like Marcus Blackwood's had at room 13. For a moment, Sarah saw the truth. Vincent Hargrove wasn't just working with the collector. He was the collector. The entity had taken human form, or the human had become an entity, or they'd merged so completely that there was no difference anymore. 200 years ago, Vincent continued, his voice taking on an otherworldly quality, my ancestor Nathaniel Hargrove found this place. He discovered the thin spot, the weakness in the veil, and he made a bargain with the thing that lived on the other side, power and immortality in exchange for service. Each generation of Hargroves has maintained that bargain, has served the collector until, finally, the boundaries blurred completely. Now I am both human and entity, both merchant and merchandise, and I've built an empire on the trade of souls. You're a monster, Sarah repeated, but with less conviction this time, because she was starting to understand the scope of what she was facing. This wasn't just one entity in one location. This was a dynasty, a family business passed down through generations, with connections and resources that spanned centuries. I'm a survivor, Vincent corrected. I adapted, I evolved, and I'm offering you the same opportunity. Join me. Work with me instead of against me. I can show you things you've never imagined. I can give you access to knowledge and power that no human has possessed in millennia. All I ask in return is your loyalty. He gestured, and suddenly the walls of the chamber became transparent. Sarah could see through them into the space beyond, and what she saw made her head spin. The chamber wasn't just a room in a basement. It was a nexus point, a hub connecting to dozens of other locations. She could see room 13 at the Grand Pacific Hotel, still sealed and guarded by Robert Chen. She could see the ruins of the Blackwood Hospital, with Margaret Chen's ghost standing. Watch. And she could see other places, locations she didn't recognize, all connected by glowing lines of energy. This is the network, Vincent explained, the web of thin places that spans the globe. And I'm not the only one managing it. There are others like me, other collectors and entities who've learned to work with humans instead of against them. We maintain the veil, we regulate the flow of energy between worlds. We keep the really dangerous things from breaking through. We're not your enemies, Ms. Mitchell. We're the only thing standing between humanity and total destruction. Sarah felt like she was falling, even though she was standing still. Was he telling the truth? Were the entities actually protecting humanity? Or was this just another manipulation, another attempt to corrupt her the way the Blackwood Hospital entity had tried to corrupt Dr. Garrett? Don't listen to him, Elena said, but her voice was uncertain. He's trying to confuse us, to make us doubt ourselves. Am I? Vincent asked. Dr. Vasquez, you've been studying these phenomena for 30 years. Surely you've wondered why the entities don't simply destroy humanity? Why they trap individual souls instead of mass destruction? Why they operate in secret instead of open conquest? It's because they're not trying to destroy us. They're trying to use us, yes, but also to preserve us. Because we're valuable, because a live human produces far more useful energy than a dead one. He moved closer to Sarah, his form stabilizing into a fully human appearance again. You want to help people? Work with me. I'll show you how to identify truly dangerous entities, the ones that need to be destroyed. I'll give you resources and support. You can save far more people by working within the system than by trying to tear it down. Sarah looked at her team, trying to gauge their reactions. Marcus looked suspicious and angry. Yuki looked desperate and confused. Father O'Brien looked deeply troubled. Elena looked calculating, and the traitor looked hopeful, as if they genuinely believed Vincent's offer was legitimate. I need time to think, Sarah said finally. This is too big a decision to make under pressure. Of course, Vincent agreed smoothly. Take all the time you need. 3 minutes should be sufficient. That's not 3 minutes, Vincent repeated, and now his voice was cold steel. After that, my offer expires and we proceed with less pleasant alternatives. You see, Ms. Mitchell, I've been very patient with you. I've allowed you to investigate, to gather your team, to come here. I could have stopped you at any point. I could have had you killed or discredited or trapped like all these other souls. But I chose not to, because I saw potential in you. I saw someone who could be useful. But my patience has limits. The temperature in the chamber dropped even further, and Sarah could see frost forming on the walls. This was Vincent's true power manifesting, the entity showing its strength. 3 minutes, he said again. Choose wisely. He walked away, leaving them alone in the chamber with the hundreds of trapped souls staring at nothing. The traitor hesitated, looking back at the team with an expression of regret and apology, then followed Vincent into the shadows. What do we do? Yuki whispered urgently. Do we take the deal? Do we fight? Do we run? We can't take the deal, Marcus said firmly. Everything he said is manipulation. He's offering just enough truth mixed with lies to make it seem reasonable, but it's not. He's a monster, and monsters don't suddenly become helpful. But the souls, Yuki insisted. My sister, we can't just leave them. If we take his deal, we're abandoning everyone else who's trapped in the other locations, Sarah pointed out. We're saying that these few hundred souls are worth more than the thousands or millions who might be suffering elsewhere. And if we don't take the deal, we might all die here, Elena added. We're outmatched and outmaneuvered. Vincent has been playing this game for 200 years. We've been at it for 2 weeks. Father O'Brien closed his eyes, his lips moving in silent prayer. Then he opened them and looked at Sarah. I believe we should fight. Not with weapons or force, but with truth and light. We expose what's happening here. We document everything, and we trust that the truth will prevail. That's a lot of faith, Marcus said skeptically. Faith is what I have, Father O'Brien replied simply, and sometimes it's enough. Sarah made her decision. We document everything. We try to free as many souls as we can, and then we get out and publish everything. No deals with Vincent, no compromises. We tell the truth and let the consequences fall where they may. Even if it means starting a panic? Elena asked. Even if it means exposing the network and potentially making things worse? Even then, Sarah confirmed. Because keeping secrets has allowed this to continue for 200 years. Maybe it's time for the secrets to end. She pulled out her camera and started recording, narrating what they were seeing for future viewers. Marcus began checking the cells, looking for a way to release the trapped souls. Yuki worked with her equipment, trying to find a technological solution to disrupt the entity's hold on the prisoners. Father O'Brien began performing an exorcism ritual, his voice strong and clear as he called on divine power to break the chains binding the souls. And Elena stood still, watching them all work, her expression unreadable. Vincent's 3 minutes passed, then 5, then 10. He didn't return, and Sarah began to hope that maybe they'd actually pulled it off. Maybe they'd called his bluff and he'd backed down. Then the chamber began to shake. The walls rippled like water, and the transparent view of the network disappeared, replaced by solid stone. The cells with the trapped souls started sinking into the floor, disappearing into depths that shouldn't exist. No! Yuki screamed, running toward the cell where her sister was trapped. But before she could reach it, it vanished completely, leaving only smooth stone floor behind. Vincent appeared again, but this time he wasn't alone. He was surrounded by figures in dark robes, human agents serving the collector. And more disturbing, behind him stood the traitor, holding what looked like one of Yuki's modified sensors but pointed at the team like a weapon. "I gave you a chance," Vincent said, and his voice was no longer smooth or persuasive. It was the grinding, inhuman voice of something ancient and hungry. "I offered you partnership, cooperation, a place in the system. You refused. So now you'll join my collection instead. At least that way you'll still be useful." The robed figures moved forward, and Sarah saw with horror that they weren't all human. Some of them were things wearing human shapes, entities that had crossed through the veil and taken physical form. They were nightmarish, their movements wrong, their faces shifting between different features. "Run!" Marcus shouted, pulling his gun and firing at the nearest figure. The bullets passed right through it without effect. They ran back the way they had come, through the twisting corridors of the basement. Behind them, Sarah could hear footsteps and laughter and sounds that didn't belong to any human throat. The traitor was helping Vincent hunt them, using their knowledge of the team to anticipate their movements. "This way!" Elena shouted, leading them down a side passage. "I studied the layout. There's another exit." They followed her, trusting her research, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Why wasn't Vincent catching them? Why were they being allowed to run? They burst out of a different staircase into what looked like a library on the first floor of the mansion. But when Sarah looked out the windows, she didn't see the main forest. She saw something else. Somewhere else. Multiple locations overlaid on top of each other, the network made visible. "We're not in the normal world anymore," Father O'Brien said grimly. "He's pulled us into the space between the thin places. We're in the network itself." "Can we get out?" Yuki asked, frantically working with her equipment. "I don't know," Elena admitted. "I've never heard of anyone escaping from inside the network before." They barricaded the library door, buying themselves a few minutes to think. Through the door, they could hear Vincent's voice, calm and patient. "You can't escape, Miss Mitchell. You're in my domain now. But I'm still willing to make a deal. Give me the traitor who warned you about this trap, and I'll let the rest of you go." Sarah's blood ran cold. The traitor who warned her? What was he talking about? She pulled out her phone and looked at the surveillance footage Jennifer had sent her. The footage she'd been reviewing in her hotel room before the investigation began. The footage that showed a team member entering the Hargrove estate alone 2 nights ago. But now, looking at it again with fresh eyes, Sarah saw something she'd missed before. The timestamp was wrong. The footage wasn't from 2 nights ago. It had been doctored, edited to make it look like one of her team members had betrayed them. But the compression artifacts and metadata inconsistencies were clear once she knew to look for them. It was a setup. Vincent had sent her fake evidence to make her distrust her team, to poison their unity from within. And she'd fallen for it. But if none of her team had betrayed them, then who had gone to the estate? Who had the access codes? Sarah looked at her team members and suddenly everything clicked into place. The way Elena had been so quick to suggest this particular route through the basement. The way she'd known about the alternate exit. The way she'd been just slightly too calm through all of this. "Elena," Sarah said quietly. "It was you." Elena smiled sadly. "I'm sorry, Sarah, I really am. But Vincent was right about one thing. Working within the system saves more people than fighting it. I've been his associate for 15 years. How do you think I knew so much about thin places? How do you think I survived 30 years of investigating without being killed or trapped? I made accommodations. I made deals. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Her mentor, her friend, her guide into this world, had been working for the enemy all along. You were feeding him information, Sarah said, her voice numb. About me, about room 13, about the Blackwood hospital. You were controlling my investigations, directing me where he wanted me to go. Not just him, Elena corrected. I work with several collectors, several entities across the network. I help them identify threats and neutralize them, but I also help them avoid unnecessary conflicts. I've prevented dozens of deadly confrontations by negotiating truces and compromises. You're a collaborator, Marcus spat. You're helping them enslave people. I'm a pragmatist, Elena replied. I saw what happens to idealists who try to fight the system head on. They die, or worse. So I chose a different path. I chose survival and incremental change over martyrdom and grand gestures. She looked at Sarah with genuine regret. I didn't want to bring you into this. I tried to warn you away after room 13, but you were so determined, so passionate. And then Vincent saw potential in you, just like he said. He wanted to recruit you, to make you another agent in his network. I agreed to help because I thought maybe if you understood how things really worked, you'd make the right choice. The right choice being to become like you, Sarah asked bitterly. To compromise everything I believe in? To stay alive, Elena said simply. To keep fighting in smaller ways instead of dying in a grand gesture that accomplishes nothing. The library door was starting to crack under the pressure from outside. Vincent's associates were breaking through. I can still save you, Elena said urgently. All of you. I have authority here as one of Vincent's agents. I can negotiate your release. You just have to agree to stop investigating, to destroy your evidence, and to never speak of what you've seen. Please, Sarah. I don't want to lose you the way I've lost so many others. Sarah looked at her team. Marcus was watching her, waiting for her decision. Yuki was crying silently, her hope of rescuing her sister now completely shattered. Father O'Brien was praying, his hands clasped around his rosary. And Sarah thought about all the souls trapped in Vincent's collection. Thought about the people suffering in the other thin places across the network. Thought about the truth being buried under layers of compromise and accommodation. No, she said, I won't make that deal. I won't become what you've become. Elena's face hardened. Then I can't help you. I'm sorry, Sarah, I really am. She walked to the door and opened it, letting Vincent and his associates pour into the library. Take them, Vincent ordered. Prepare them for collection. They'll make fine additions, especially Miss Mitchell. She has a strong will. That always makes the eventual breaking so much more satisfying. The robed figures advanced. Sarah raised her camera, still recording, determined that if she was going to die or be trapped here, at least there would be evidence. At least someone would know what happened. Then the windows shattered. Robert Chen came through first, his ghostly form solidifying into something more real, more solid, more powerful than Sarah had ever seen him. Behind him came Margaret Chen from the Blackwood hospital, and with them came dozens of other spirits, other guardians from other locations across the network. You're not taking them, Robert said, his voice carrying a power that made Vincent step back. Not today, not ever. You have no authority here, Chen, Vincent snarled. You're just a guardian of one small location. I am the collector. I control the entire network." "You controlled it," Margaret Chen corrected. "Past tense. You see, we Guardians have been talking. We've been organizing. And we've been waiting for the right moment to act. This is that moment." The Guardians surrounded Sarah's team, creating a protective circle. And then, impossibly, Sarah felt solid ground beneath her feet again. The library dissolved, the network connection broke, and they were standing outside the Hargrove estate in normal daylight, breathing normal air. "How?" Sarah gasped. "The Guardians pulled you out," Robert explained. "We can't enter the network ourselves, but we can reach in and pull people back to the normal world. It's one of our few powers." Vincent appeared in the doorway of the mansion, his face twisted with rage. "You'll pay for this, Chen. All of you will pay. I'll hunt down every Guardian, destroy every thin place. You protect." "No, you won't," Father O'Brien interrupted. He'd been quiet during the escape, but now he stepped forward, holding a small object that glowed with soft light. "Because I know what you are, Vincent Hargrove. I know the true name of the entity you merged with, and with that name, I can bind you." He began speaking in Latin, a ritual of binding and banishment. Vincent screamed, a sound that made the windows of the mansion crack and shatter. The building began to collapse, 200 years of supernatural architecture breaking down all at once. "The souls," Yuki cried. "They're still inside." "No, they're not," Margaret Chen said gently. She gestured and Sarah saw them. Hundreds of translucent figures emerging from the collapsing building. The trapped souls were being freed, released from their cells as Vincent's power broke. One of them was a young woman who looked exactly like Yuki. She walked straight to her sister and smiled. "Yuki," she said, "I knew you'd find me eventually." Yuki sobbed and tried to embrace her, but her arms passed through the ghost. You're not solid." "Not yet," her sister agreed. "But I'm free. We're all free. And now we can move on, find peace, go wherever we're supposed to go next. Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me." She faded away, along with all the other freed souls, leaving behind only a sense of peace and gratitude. The Hargrove estate collapsed completely, leaving nothing but rubble. And somewhere in that rubble, Vincent Hargrove was trapped, bound by Father O'Brien's ritual, unable to escape or cause further harm. "It's over," Marcus said, his voice filled with exhausted relief. "It's not over," Elena said quietly. She'd come out of the mansion just before it collapsed, looking aged and tired. "Vincent was just one collector in a network of dozens. The others will know what happened here. They'll be angry. They'll be scared. And they'll come after all of you." "Let them come," Sarah said. "We have evidence now. We have witnesses. We have a story that the world needs to hear." She turned to Robert Chen. "Thank you for saving us, for organizing the Guardians, for everything." "You would have done the same," Robert replied. "Besides, we Guardians are tired of standing alone. It's time we had allies in the living world. Time we worked together to fix what's broken." "Then let's do that," Sarah said. "Let's build a real organization. Not one that compromises with evil, but one that fights it. We'll document these places, free the trapped souls, and expose the entities that prey on humanity. It will be dangerous," Father O'Brien warned. "The network will fight back." "Good," Marcus said. "I've been wanting a real fight for years." Yuki nodded, wiping away her tears. "My sister is free. Now I want to help free everyone else." They looked at Elena, who stood apart from the group, neither fully with them nor fully against them. "I can't join you," she said. "I've made too many compromises, burned too many bridges. But I won't work against you either. Consider me neutral. And if you need information about the network, I might be persuaded to share what I know." It wasn't forgiveness and it wasn't trust, but it was something. Sarah nodded acceptance. They returned to their vehicles and drove away from the ruins of the Hargrove estate. Sarah sat in the back of Marcus's truck, uploading her footage to multiple secure servers, ensuring it couldn't be destroyed or suppressed. Her phone buzzed with a message from the unknown number. "Well done. The Hargrove collector is bound and his operation is shut down. But you're right that this is just the beginning. There are 34 locations remaining on your list. And now the other collectors know you're coming. They'll be prepared. They'll be defensive. Some will try to negotiate. Others will try to destroy you. Are you sure you want to continue?" Sarah looked at her battered, exhausted, traumatized team, looked at the evidence she'd gathered, looked at the path ahead. She typed back, "Yes. Give me the next location." The response came immediately. "Brooklyn, New York, an apartment building called the Meridian, 14 floors, built in 1967. On paper, it's a normal residential building. In reality, it's a feeding ground. The entity there doesn't trap souls like Vincent did. It consumes them slowly, feeding on the life force of the residents. People move in healthy and vibrant. Within 6 months, they're sick, depressed, dying. No one's made the connection yet because it's so gradual. You have 2 months before the entity becomes strong enough to expand its territory. Stop it before then." Sarah shared the message with her team. They looked at each other, and she saw the same determination in their eyes that she felt in her heart. 2 months, Marcus said. "That gives us time to plan, to prepare better than we did for Hargrove." "And time to recruit more help," Yuki added. "Robert said the Guardians are ready to work with us. That's a huge advantage." "Time to rest and heal too," Father O'Brien said gently. "We can't fight effectively if we're broken ourselves." Sarah nodded. "Then let's do this right. Let's build something that will last, not just a team but a movement. We'll call it—" She paused, thinking. "The Veil Initiative. Our mission: document, expose, and fight against supernatural threats. Rescue victims, support guardians, and slowly, carefully tear down the network that's been exploiting humanity for centuries." "The Veil Initiative," Marcus repeated, testing the name. "I like it." They drove back toward civilization, toward safety, toward the next battle. Sarah knew that Vincent Hargrove had been right about one thing. This work would consume her. It would become her entire life. She'd probably never write about garden shows or local politics again. But she'd also never have to pretend that the world was normal and safe when she knew it wasn't. She'd never have to ignore suffering because it was too strange or too frightening to acknowledge. She'd be fighting, actively making a difference, saving people who desperately needed saving. And that, Sarah decided, was worth everything. As they reached the highway and headed south toward home, Sarah looked back one last time at the hill where the Hargrove estate had stood. The ruins were barely visible through the trees. A monument to 200 years of horror finally ended. But she knew there were other monuments out there, other places where people suffered in silence, other entities preying on the vulnerable. 34 more locations on her list, and probably hundreds more that hadn't been documented yet. The work was just beginning. The war against the network would be long and hard and dangerous. They'd lose battles. They'd lose people. They might even lose the war entirely. But they would fight. And they would keep fighting until every soul was free, every entity was bound, and every thin place was sealed. That was the promise Sarah Mitchell made to herself, to her team, and to all the victims past, present, and future. The secret in room 13 had led her down a path she never expected. But now, having walked that path, she wouldn't choose any other. The story continued, and Sarah was ready to write every chapter, no matter where it led or what it cost. Because some stories needed to be told, and some battles needed to be fought. This was hers. This was theirs. This was the beginning of everything.